Chapter 2997. Wei Wei Bai was just about to show off her beautiful spirit and spit on the monk's face. However, Ning Chen had already lowered his head, clasped the back of her neck, pressed her against the wall, and kissed her fiercely. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pressed against his shoulder, staring at him in disbelief. Ning Chen was not too greedy for this kiss, but after making sure that she swallowed it, he left indifferently. His thin lips were stained with some snacks, so he stuck out the tip of his tongue and licked them. Then he said calmly, "Don't waste it, you can't go outside to get spiritual energy now, and there are no human lives for you to squander. If you don't eat some snacks, you will collapse." As he said, he casually raised his hand and tucked her messy hair behind her ear. Then he lowered his head and kissed the tip of her ear and cheeks. Wei Wei Bai was so nervous that she held her breath, as if she could not believe what he was doing. Ning Chen was incomparably indifferent. "You like me, and you have been treating me like this before. I'm just repeating it once. Why are you so surprised?" Bai Weiwei's face was genuinely shocked. Nonsense, it was natural for her to be shameless. But Monk Ning was suddenly shameless too. Was this not surprising enough? Damn, she should not have been too tempted. A good and honest monk, learning from her every day. He had learned bad things. Ning Chen kissed her while feeding her pastries. It was as if he did not feel that his actions were out of line, scary, and unrestrained. Even when he calmly pulled on her robe, wanting to hug her. He was abnormally calm. But he did not restrain himself. Wei Wei Bai felt that this monk was a bit too much, so she immediately stretched out her hands and pinched his neck fiercely. "Monk, you're still saying that you're not being controlled by the darkness? You weren't like this in the past. You weren't so bad and you wouldn't bully me like this. I've killed someone and seduced you. Is this a heinous crime?" Her strength was not enough to leave a mark on his skin. Although he was a human, the power of cultivation was more powerful than any demon. She was just a weak little demoness. No matter how much essence she absorbed, without years of cultivation, she would not be able to struggle for half a round against him. Ning Chen was still unhurried. His voice was low and deep. "You've killed so many people, but you don't have the aura of death on your body. That bit of aura is on your fingers, and it's already dispersed. What did you do with the lives of those who died?" This was a question. He did not find the aura of the person she had killed on her body. Once a fairy began to eat humans and absorb their life force, their souls would definitely be tainted with their aura. Could it be that the purification of the lotus was able to cleanse his body of this smell? Wei Wei Bai said coldly with an expressionless face, "I'm only killing bad people to save people. I don't want their essence, so I'll throw it all away." Ning Chen's fingers paused for a moment, and his tone was somewhat enlightened. Then you're really a good kid. After all, not all demons had the self-control to not touch those living beings." Wei Wei Bai sneered, "But you've become bad." Ning Chen faintly hummed in agreement. She stretched out her clean and fair fingers and gently touched her eyelashes. It was stained with the moisture of tears. He was very careful and extremely gentle. Wei Wei Bai's gaze softened a little, and then she was pushed down. Ning Chen gently bent down, his eyes tinged with a hint of intoxication. His voice was hoarse. "Don't move, I'm just touching you." Wei Wei Bai, no, it didn't seem like he was just touching her. It felt more like he was going to touch her again and again, touch her again and again. / You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2998. Monk Ning had never seen a woman before, so once he did, his self-control would disappear. He would not know how to control himself at all. It was impossible for Wei Wei Bai not to move. How could she express her fear, confusion, and resistance towards his change? "You can't keep me locked up. My mistake of killing those bad people is not enough to be brought here." She thought that if she explained, he would understand. He would even let her out. Ning Chen calmly rubbed her hair, then gradually increased his strength. He grabbed her slender wrist and pressed her against the cold wall. He slowly leaned over, his eyelashes drooping slightly. His eyes were slightly dark, making the cinnabar between his eyebrows look incomparably gorgeous. The youth said in a low voice, "Be good, don't struggle. My self-control is not good now." I let the darkness spread freely. I don't want to go out and harm the common people, so I can only use it to harm you." When he said this, he gently kissed her cheek. His movements were neither slow nor fast. "You are still not sensible. Whether the crime is big or not, the right to decide is in my hands. You were born in the spiritual pool at my door. You have never had the right to decide. You were born to be mine." He was too close. His breath brushed against her neck, and his kiss had already begun to fall on her collarbone. It doesn't matter if you escaped from hell to escape from heaven's punishment and possessed the lotus, or if there were other reasons you had to kill. The girl's soft voice began to beg for mercy. But he was indifferent. Just like in the past when he forced her to recite the scriptures, he pushed forward bit by bit without wavering. No matter how distracted she was or how resistant she would calmly finish the matter. The youth's breath was also a little chaotic, but his words were already cold in this silent space. "It doesn't matter if you are just tempting me for fun or doing bad things for fun," he whispered softly and lovingly. "The Buddha's heart hell opened because of you. You have to bear it." Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with tears. "I don't understand. You have changed. You are not the monk from before." The youth looked at her quietly. His thin lips suddenly curled up slightly. His eyes flashed, slowly revealing a beautiful smile. A gloomy and dark hell. A pure and holy young man. They were as gorgeous as the red spider lily and emitted a decadent aura. "I've never changed. I've just endured until I met you." His tone was light, but it was so serious that it made people's backs go numb. "I just don't want to bear with it." Therefore, even if she had turned over a new leaf now, she would not be able to change her ways. Perhaps he had wronged her. She was still that innocent little lotus flower. It was useless. When he took that step, he couldn't take it back. Darkness poured out. The only place he could vent was here. After he turned into a demon, no matter how many people he harmed, it would not be as good as harming her alone. Because she was the only one who could stir his emotions and condense his desires. He couldn't let go of her. It was not that he was unwilling, but that he was powerless. Ningchen lowered his head, kissed her, and explained patiently. "It's fine if you don't understand. All you need to know is that you have to stay with me in this dark place until I die. You'll stay with me for as long as I live." Such a kindergarten-level explanation. She should understand now. Wei Wei Bai understood. Wasn't it just a monk eating meat? He had never eaten meat or chewed on bones since he was born. But she tempted him with braised pork every day. Then he finally licked a mouthful of meat. From then on, it was out of control and he relied on her. He ate her like she was meat every day. Chapter 2999. Moreover, how could she explain that this plate of meat was good meat, not bad, and did not need to be cleaned up? He still did not give up and wanted to continue cleaning. There was no other way, because he did not care whether she was good or bad from the beginning. What he cared about was that he wanted to eat meat. And as the instigator, she had to be responsible for filling his stomach. Who cared whether she was good or bad? Monk Ning left after eating his fill. Before he left, he even made a small bed for her, a soft blanket, and a big pillow. There was also a small table, and on the table was a small basin. The basin was filled with water from the spirit pool, and the mist that came out was spirit energy. Spirit energy could replenish her energy and make her body feel better. Wei Wei Bai looked haggard, feeling that she was the first spirit that was squeezed dry by a human. The system came back to take a look. It saw that its host's slender body was wrapped in Monk Ning's white monk robe. This was Monk Ning's best and most handsome artifact. He put it on her so that her fragile body would not be eroded by the cold of the demon's subduing tower. But it was too loose, and when she wore it, it felt like a child secretly wearing an adult's clothes. The system glanced at its host and saw that she was listless. Could it be that she was destroyed too much? It immediately searched for food to see if there was anything that could be given to her to nourish her body. If this continued, what would happen to her kidney failure? Wei Wei Bai suddenly sighed. "I can't finish the game, and I don't have a strategy anymore." Her gold coins were not late. Then she fell into a trap and died. She could not get past this level. The system was silent for a while, then it opened the game. "Well, then let's continue?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up and she nodded. If I don't pass this time, I want to torture people. System. Host, you have finally transcended everything. Torturing people was not because they were sick, but because they did not pass the game and were in a bad mood? But thinking about the past, the system felt that it was nothing special. Well, it was just a blackened pervert, right? It was used to it, so there was no need to make a fuss. Let's continue the game. In the cold tower, the salted fish host and the system that indulged salted fish happily continued to play the game. This game was well developed. As for the strategy, let's talk about it after the game. This game is so fun. Life went by as Monk Ning ate meat and the host played games. This was a simple yet beautiful day. When Ning Chen was satisfied, his favorability increased by a few points. He was now 93 years old. Wei Wei Bai felt that she should just live a normal life. Not bad. Especially since there were new levels in the game that hadn't been cleared yet. With Monk Ning taking care of them, they were served with good food and drinks. Although the living environment was a little bad, because there was only a small basin of water, it made her look a little listless. However, there was very little sunlight, so it was fine as long as the skin was protected from ultraviolet rays. Moreover, Monk Ning also warmed her bed every day. The environment was quiet and suitable for playing games and watching cartoons. Every now and then, her favorability would slowly increase by 1 or 2 points. Although he knew that the reason for the increase in favorability was because he was satisfied with the food at the beginning. However, as long as he didn't cause any trouble, he would obediently stay here. If he lived like this until Ning Chen died, his favorability would be full. Just as Wei Wei Bai was happily playing games with the system, she suddenly heard a voice. Ding, the strategy time has been unlocked. The system's automatic notification sounded. Strategy time, please complete the main mission within 1 month. Wei Wei Bai's smiling face instantly froze. Then, the game character fell into the trap again and died. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the comma. Chapter 3000. In a month, she would get the remaining 7 points of favorability. With Monk Ning's current stubborn character, if he didn't take a long time, he would take 8 to 10 years. Stubborn Ning's favorability wouldn't increase at all. Wei Wei Bai silently put down the game. She couldn't just muddle along and wait for death. She had to seriously plan a strategy. Monk Ning was extremely sullen. He would either not move or move nonstop. His personality was extremely flawed. Other than that kind of posture, he didn't know how to be flexible in other things. For example, he felt that she was a big demon and a sinner. He would lock her up until the end. He wouldn't doubt whether there would be people who were wronged under the rules of the heavenly Tao. Wei Wei Bai discussed with the system whether she could use the heavenly punishment. The system was silent for a long time before saying, "This thing will always follow you. You being locked in the demon subduing tower is also a kind of protection." The demon subduing tower was actually built by the male lead. Both inside and outside the tower were imprisoned by the Buddhist light. No evil could invade, and no poison could enter. Those who were locked up here, no matter how great the demons or evil things were, they couldn't escape. Moreover, when the array was set up, because it was stained with the power of the Buddhist bone, and the rules of the array were drawn with the male lead's blood, it just happened to contain the rules of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, the heavenly Tao automatically ignored this place and wouldn't attack. As for why the rules drawn by the male lead were close to the rules of the heavenly Tao, he was a proud son of the heavens, so the heavenly Tao liked him. Wei Wei Bai looked at the wall of chains in front of her and thought of the heavenly punishment outside the tower. It was obvious that she couldn't step out of here. No wonder Monk Ning was so assured to leave her here. With her strength, she probably wouldn't be able to open this wall of chains even if she cultivated for hundreds of years. Wei Wei Bai touched her chin and sighed. In other words, the old trick of running away won't work. Monk Ning was too calm and steady. When he locked her up, he had basically cut off all her escape routes. Wei Wei Bai thought about it again. Doesn't he think that I'm an external soul? Why don't I use death escape and possess another creature? This way, he would be able to evade the heavenly punishment for a while, and he would also be able to switch bodies. Wait a minute, If he switched bodies, would the first beauty effect still be there? He was just about to ask. The system said faintly, "This tower is imprisoning souls. Otherwise, there would be so many demons, dragons among demons and phoenixes among demons. Who wouldn't have thought of changing his shell? This was what the demons were good at. How could the male lead not think of this?" Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. That's good. Even if she couldn't bear to part with the most beautiful face in the world. This method could not be used. He had to think of another way. If the plan doesn't work, what's the point? Oh, he couldn't bear to lose face. The two systems chattered for a long time. They all felt that Monk Ning had eliminated all possibilities. As a result, many of the old tricks could not be used. Since he couldn't escape or jump around, he could only find a way to cause trouble in the pagoda. Wei Wei Bai, pretending to be sick? The system took out a small notebook and wrote it down. Try it, you might be able to earn a point. Wei Wei Bai, actively seducing. The system continued to write it down. You can also try, men are very easy to talk to, you might be able to earn a point. Wei Wei Bai, pretending to be pitiful, desolate, cute and coquettish? The system nodded and continued to write it down. Okay, you should be able to get half a point. It kept writing it down and scribbling it down. Chapter 3001. She took out a list of the tower's strategy points. They all felt that they could add 3 or 4 points to the basic score of 93 points. As for the remaining points, they would wait for about a month before they died. Well, 100 points would be fine. They were all assembly line strategy products. Su Tong and Su Tong looked calm as if they were old employees. They exuded a greasy and familiar temperament. After checking the plan form, Wei Wei Bai said that it was safe. Then, come on, continue playing games. Because of playing games day and night, and the lack of spirit energy, and being destroyed by Monk Ning, the environment in the tower was not good. Wei Wei Bai finally got what she wanted. With a plan, she directly lay down and fell sick. She yawned lazily, afraid that she was not sick enough. She even asked the system to choose the cheapest discounted cold medicine. Cold medicine, cold medicine. You will definitely catch a cold if you eat it. Don't you think it works? Wei Wei Bai ate it and then kicked the monk's robe on the ground. This thing was immune to poison, water, and fire. It also had its own temperature adjustment. After wearing it for a long time, the body became stronger. Throw it away. It was unlikely that a demon would catch a cold, but she ate it and felt cold medicine. Not to mention a demon, even a scion would catch a cold. If she didn't catch a cold, she would ask the system's supermarket for a refund. In the middle of the night, Wei Wei Bai touched her head with relief. Although the fever was not serious, it was enough. Anyway, Monk Ning didn't lock her up because he hated her. He liked her very much. He was just paranoid and dark. He would feel the heartache. When she was in a daze from the fever, she suddenly felt a hand on her forehead. It seemed to be probing something. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled, and she opened her eyes with difficulty. Her white and tender face was full of red, and her eyes were misty. She saw the young man standing by the bed, frowning slightly, and touching her forehead and face with his white and beautiful fingers. Ning Chen looked down at the monk's robe that was thrown on the ground. He pursed his lips then said softly, "You don't have enough spiritual aura right now. The clothes can protect you from harm, so why aren't you wearing them?" Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a while before realizing who he was. She coldly looked away and said in a hoarse voice, "It's all your scent. I don't want to see it." Ning Chen's fingers paused. His face was a little pale, but his expression was still calm. Then, he reached out his finger and gently touched her slightly dry lips. "Open your mouth." Wei Wei Bai remained indifferent. She even shrunk her body and hid under the blanket. She only revealed her eyes to glare at him in dissatisfaction. The beautiful girl's eyes were filled with tears, as if they would condense into fragile tears at any moment and fall down. It was indescribably pitiful. Ning Chen looked at her in silence for a while before his expression became somewhat dejected. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that he had found his conscience and that her favorability towards him was about to loosen. The youth's fingers were already under the quilt. He stretched out his arm and grabbed her waist, pulling her into his embrace. The quilt was between the two of them. He felt that it was a hindrance. With a cold expression, he pulled the quilt away and threw it on the ground. It was accompanied by the white monk's robes. Wei Wei Bai was a little dazed. She felt that there was something wrong with the monk's reaction. Wouldn't most people start to comfort him? Why did he suddenly go berserk? Before she could kick him away, the youth had already bent down. His hot, thin lips pressed against her cheek. His strong breathing was messy and heavy. His voice was low and hoarse. "Don't move. Let me see what's wrong with you." Chapter 3002. What was he looking at? Or did he want to do something else? Wei Wei Bai felt that she should refuse. Her eyes were full of resistance, but she couldn't avoid the youth's strong hug. His fingers began to examine her body inch by inch. Wei Wei Bai, this was taking advantage of her, right? It must be. The youth's slightly warm fingertips lightly touched her neck. The fragile girl was unusually light, cute, and soft. Her breath was fresh, and her soul was clean. She didn't have the malicious aura of a demon's territory at all. Ning Chen examined her again and made sure that she was fine. Demons weren't humans. If it didn't involve their lives, they wouldn't easily show symptoms of illness. He examined her soul and found that it wasn't damaged. The youth looked up, his ink-black eyes calm and serious. "What method did you use to deliberately make yourself so fragile?" Wei Wei Bai's white cheeks were stained with red, and her eyes were full of mist. Even if she stared at him, she still looked unusually soft. Her voice was thin and weak, like an injured kitten. Her tone even had a soft feeling. "Monk, is it fun to always wrongly accuse me? You suspect that I'm sick, and you suspect that I've killed someone. You clearly don't have any evidence, and you're just relying on your stubborn guess to sentence me to death. Do you, sob, hate me that much?" She pursed her lips, and her tears finally turned into water droplets, falling from her clear eyes. Ning Chen's heart trembled fiercely when he was swept by her weak and pitiful eyes. He even felt sad. He lowered his thick eyelashes, casting a faint shadow under his eyes. It made his eyes even gloomier. Finally, the youth's voice softened a bit. "I just care about you too much." He cared so much that he couldn't kill her. Her brain wasn't good, and she lacked common sense. Demons wouldn't get sick, but their souls would be damaged, causing them to look like they were sick. Her soul wasn't damaged, and the only thing that made her uncomfortable and fragile was the lack of spiritual energy. But if the spiritual energy was so lacking that it hurt her, she would directly turn into a lotus. If she didn't turn into a lotus, it meant that the spiritual energy was barely enough, and it wouldn't make her sick. It wasn't that she was pretending to be sick. Maybe she used some method to force herself into this state. To gain his sympathy. He had fought with the fiendish demons for so many years. The darkness in the Buddha's heart hell was filled with all sorts of schemes. It was unscrupulous and had no limits to its enticement. If one step is wrong, he would not have the chance to lock her up, because he was already dead. Her little scheme, which was full of loopholes, could not be hidden from him. What surprised him was that she was actually able to hide some little secrets from him. Was it some kind of ability that made him sick? All of these understandings and doubts eventually turned into a single sentence from his mouth. Ning Chen lowered his head and gently kissed her tears. Then he kissed her lips and deepened the kiss. Wei Wei Bai, seeing that she didn't move, he helplessly left her and said in a low voice, "Aren't you going to bite me?" Wei Wei Bai just stared at him blankly with a pale face. Ning Chen could only bite her lower lip and exert force. Beads of blood oozed out. Then, with blood in his mouth, he deepened the kiss. His blood was the kind of blood that demons loved. It was exceptionally nourishing. It was even more perfect than seizing spiritual energy from the outside. He didn't give it to any other demons, but to her. Wei Wei Bai felt that pervert Ning's taste was simply strange. Chapter 3003. Wei Wei Bai then felt that something was wrong. She reached out and touched her. The fever had subsided. Her limbs were no longer weak, and her body had regained its lightness. Was the cold effective? Ning Chen kissed her until she recovered. Then he reached out and rubbed her messy hair, whispering, "Don't force yourself like this in the future. I won't let you out. You can only die here. Even if you hurt yourself, I have a way to save you." At this point, Ning Chen's thin lips curled up coldly. "You definitely won't like it. I'll turn you into a lotus and raise you here. Then I'll turn you back." Wei Wei Bai, these cruel words, honest people really shouldn't be provoked. Otherwise, he wouldn't be angry all the time. If he was angry, he might be angry for a lifetime. Just when Wei Wei Bai felt that pretending to be sick was useless, the youth in front of her picked up the monk's robe on the ground and shook it. The monk's robe turned into a blanket. This was a magic weapon that could transform into various forms according to the user's ability. The blanket was light and soft. He draped it over her body. Then he silently turned around and left. When he returned, he brought a water basin. The water in the spiritual pool was inside. He twisted a clean handkerchief and carefully wiped her face and body. His fingers were trembling slightly, and even his breathing was chaotic. But he didn't indulge his desires. With every step he took, the shadow below him was abnormally dark. This meant that his inner demon had reached a stage where he couldn't get rid of it. And such a Ning Chen could force himself not to touch her and not indulge his desires. He was already forcing himself to the limit to make a sacrifice. Then he made a few soft and sweet pastries and fed her little by little. The normal feeding method. Wei Wei Bai didn't do anything else. After he wiped her lips clean, he turned around and was about to get something else. The girl behind him leaned over softly and reached out to hug his waist. She was relying on him like before. "Monk, don't be angry, okay?" Her voice was weak, but her tone was gentle. "I won't do bad things in the future. Don't make me angry." Ning Chen didn't look back. He just lowered his eyes and looked at her fingers that were hugging his waist. His thin red lips pursed and a trace of sadness appeared in his dark eyes. The girl didn't get a response from him, so she slowly fell silent. She just stubbornly hugged him. Ning Chen didn't maintain the same posture. He didn't turn his head or make a sound. In the gloomy pagoda, the two of them were silent. An aura of despair and sorrow pervaded the air. Finally, the girl couldn't take it anymore. She pressed her forehead against his back and cried in a low voice. "Monk, how can you be so ruthless? How can you lock me up for life? Why don't you just kill me? I want to go out. Let me out. Don't bully me anymore." She cried too pitifully and too weakly. Her choking sobs were more like dense thorns that pierced the hearts of others. Ning Chen's body stiffened. He clenched his fists, but he didn't respond or move. It was like a solidified stone. Only the pitiful cries of the young girl echoed in the deep and dark pagoda. When she finally got tired of crying and released him, Ning Chen silently turned back, pressed her on the bed and covered her with a quilt. Gentle and strong. Stubborn and affectionate. He also quietly bent down and untied the chains on her feet. Bai Weiwei's eyes were red, and her face was also red. She was exhausted, but she couldn't jump up and play any tricks. Ning Chen sat by the bed and reached out to gently stroke her hair. Finally he spoke. "Can't sleep? I'll recite the scriptures for you." Wei Wei Bai. Then, Monk Ning seriously recited the scriptures for her. Wei Wei Bai looked like she had nothing to live for. She listened to the hypnotic scriptures and finally fell asleep. Ning Chen sat by the bed and silently looked at her for a long time. Then he lowered his head and kissed her. Then he turned and walked out. The door was closed again. When he stepped out of the pagoda, he saw all the monks of Wanyuan Temple gathered outside. They were looking at the sky as if they were facing a great enemy. Ning Chen also looked up indifferently. The dark clouds in the sky were rolling. The thunder dragon was faintly discernible in the dark clouds. It was terrifying. An old monk walked over and respectfully bowed. "Martial uncle, this heavenly punishment is not small. The demon in the pagoda may have committed a heinous crime. Should we?" Ning Chen looked up slightly. His eyes were extremely cold. The scene fell silent. No one dared to speak. Ning Chen looked at the sky quietly again. The heavenly punishment had not left. When this punishment fell, one's soul would be scattered and return to nothingness. At that time, if he wanted to find her, he wouldn't be able to find her even if he went to heaven or hell. So, how could he let her out of the pagoda? Only the power of the pagoda's array could protect her from the heavenly punishment. If he let her out, she was playful and disobedient. Once she left his side for a while, he couldn't bear the consequences. Ningchen stood in the cold wind. The prayer beads on his wrist floated. Under his messy short hair, his eyes were cold and calm. The people locked in the demon-subduing tower, whether they are demons or demons, are all under my protection. His words were extremely calm. If the heavenly Tao stops me, I will go against the heavenly Tao. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 95. / Chapter 3004. The system silently took out the information and began to record the male lead's ability. Damn it, the information on the male lead strategy was getting less and less. It gave the system the wrong information every day, causing their strategy to be obstructed. As the system typed, it punished itself for not eating chocolate, only eating chocolate powder and cucumber slices. Wei Wei Bai was counting with her fingers. It seems that it's hard to fool the monk about the soul, but 90+ favorability is enough to make him unable to do anything to me when I'm lying. For example, he knew that she was pretending to be sick. If she cried miserably, his mind would be shaken. As for the missing information, Wei Wei Bai said that the system tried its best. It must be too poor. The equipment was old, and it couldn't bear to replace it. That was why the information was so incomplete. That was why Wei Wei Bai couldn't bear to use this to scold the system. After all, it was poor, old, and old. It hurt his self-esteem too much. If the system was defeated, how could he chase Soft Connect in the future? The system asked, "Can you sell 100 favorability points in a month?" Wei Wei Bai thought seriously for a while, then shook her head lightly. The previous strategy on the assembly line won't work. Although the monk's favorability has increased to 95, it won't be easy to increase the last 5 points. After all, in his eyes, she was now a sinful demon who was suffering the punishment of the heavens. He loved her to this extent. It was already the limit. Monk Ning didn't want to open up the inner demon. So when she opened up the inner demon, he couldn't suppress it. Ningchen should hate her. Such hatred caused his favorable impression points to stop at 99 and never reach 100. Wei Wei Bai hugged the clothes and quilt given by Monk Ning, her face calm and silent. The system also silently chewed on the cucumber, not disturbing her. Finally, Wei Wei Bai said, "Since he cares so much about his Buddhist heart's hell not being solved, and I made the inner demon run wild, then let him fulfill his wish, and the favorability will increase." The system nodded, then flipped through the information. His inner demons are different from others. It is very difficult to resolve them. That dark world of his is caused by the dark aura of all things in the world when he is cultivating. Therefore, there were many desires and inner demons. None of them belonged to the male lead. Instead, all kinds of demons, humans, and living creatures were affected by the characteristics of the Buddha bone. It was like the Buddha bones were glue. Then, when it fell into a dirty place, it would automatically stick to a lot of things that did not belong to the glue itself. And these things were still glue's troubles. If the glue itself was to return to its original, transparent, and pure appearance, it was almost impossible to get the filth out bit by bit. That was why the male lead could only suppress her and then use the stupidest method. He didn't understand lust or desire. It would not increase the burden of the Buddha bones. Then, day by day, the dark aura was removed bit by bit. But after the host appeared, he didn't have the time to get rid of the dark aura, and he even developed desires. In fact, it could even be said that they were deeply in love with each other. The inner demon had finally defeated him, the jailer who had imprisoned him. Then, the male lead himself became the greatest accomplice of the inner demon. More accurately, he was the manipulator. He was dirty, so he didn't clean it up. In any case, he would just be dirty, and then drag the host to be dirty too. After the system told her some of the information it knew and speculated, Wei Wei Bai nodded. "I think so too, so Monk Ning's current mentality is actually self-abandoning. I'm afraid that he has suicidal tendencies." To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 3005. Every time she resisted, he would stare at her with his deep eyes without moving. Then he would lick her ears slowly and whisper, "If I die, you won't have to suffer so much." Thinking of those images, Bai Weiwei, expressionless, reached out and pinched her ear. She didn't mean anything else, it was just an itch in her ear. Then she said, "That's why I think Monk Ning didn't plan to live for long. He was originally pure, but he was forced into this state. He probably wanted to find a reason to kill himself." His current inner demon was only limited to her. It was tormenting her. But if the inner demon continued to lose control, it would slowly lose its mind and harm the world. Monk Ning was probably not the kind of person who liked to harm the world, because it was rare to meet such a difficult attacker. Wei Bai studied the information with the system. In the end, they finally decided on a plan. Wei Bai said with a melancholy face, "This plan, if it doesn't succeed, it will really fail." The system looked worried. "Yes, it's too risky." Wei Bai nodded in agreement. Then Su Tong and the system fell into deep silence again. Finally, Wei Bai said, "Let's play games." The system picked up the game console. "Okay, we will definitely succeed this time." Wei Bai said, "Yes, there is no gold coin that I can't eat." Then the system and the host fell into the game again, unable to extricate themselves. What was the strategy? After working for a long time, as an old fox lying in a deep fryer that was about to be fried into black charcoal, Su Tong said that playing games was more fun. Ningchen walked out of the Hall of Buddhas. His expression was steady, and his footsteps were a little staggered. He looked back at the hall. The Buddha statue inside was very strict, but it also contained the power of love. He stretched out his hand, and a red lotus seed appeared in his palm. This was the lotus seed that had been raised in front of the Buddha statue for 100 years. It was also a rare plant-type artifact in one Yuan temple. It was a great supplement for plant spirits. Ningchen looked at the red lotus seed in her palm, and a trace of worry appeared on her cold face. After all, the demon-subduing tower was a place that suppressed demons. She stayed too long. It would harm the source. The shadow under Ningchen's feet was too heavy. When he entered the inner palace, for a moment, he couldn't move. This was because the 10,000 Buddhas Hall was a peaceful place that did not allow people with desires to enter. He had forced his way in, but he had still suffered a backlash. Ningchen slowly walked towards the devil-subduing tower. When he opened the door, he saw Wei Bai lying on the bed. She seemed to be very bored and was counting her fingers. Hearing the sound of the door opening, she just lazily turned around to look at him. Then, she ignored him and turned her head again, continuing to count her fingers. She didn't even read the Buddhist scriptures that he gave her. Ningchen pursed his lips but didn't say anything. He just waved the chains away. Then, he walked to the bedside and reached out to touch her face to make sure that she didn't abuse him or make him sick again. Only then did he take out the lotus seed and say softly, "Eat it." Wei Bai felt a huge amount of spiritual energy. She frowned and looked down at the 100-year-old holy object. "Isn't this the calming thing in your temple? Why are you giving it to me?" Ningchen was silent for a while before he said calmly, "Eat it. You can consolidate your cultivation and purify your evil aura from before." This was the main point. Reduce and clean up the evil she had done before. Then she would stay here. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time, if you like. Chapter 3006. If Sky Law couldn't smell her breath, he would leave. She didn't know what she had done, but Sky Law was chasing her so relentlessly. Ningchen wasn't willing to pursue her mistakes. He only wanted her. He would cover for her no matter what she had done. As for the future, he wouldn't let her do bad things. She couldn't see anyone else other than him. At least, that was the case before he died. A trace of Buddhist light appeared on Ningchen's finger. The Buddhist light entered the lotus seed, and the red lotus seed became as soft as water. Then he stuffed the lotus seed into her mouth. Wei Bai was slightly stunned. Seeing that the lotus seed was about to enter her stomach, she didn't hesitate. She hugged his neck with both hands, raised her head, and kissed him fiercely. She forcefully stuffed the lotus seed back into his mouth. The chaotic kiss was accompanied by a large amount of sweet and cool spiritual energy. Ningchen reacted quickly. He pressed her on the bed, grabbed her wrists, and didn't let her move. After that, he immediately left her lips. But there was still a large amount of spiritual energy entering his body. And the girl under him had a soft smile on her cold face. She said cheerfully, "Monk, you need this more than me now. You're plagued by inner demons. After eating it, you might be able to wake up. Then you'll find that there's nothing good about women. It's better to be empty." Her smiling words carried a hint of melancholy. Ningchen pursed his lips tightly. He couldn't spit out what he had just eaten. Although there were many ways to replenish spiritual energy for plant spirits. But the lotus seed just now had a more important function, which was to cleanse her sins. He protected her. Sky Law was powerless. But in the future, he was dead and she was still alive. At that time, how could she face Sky Law's pursuit? Ningchen lowered his eyes and looked at the girl who still had an innocent and ignorant face. She didn't understand his good intentions at all. A willful and reckless demon. He lowered his eyes quietly. His thick eyelashes covered half of his gloomy eyes. He was about to say something, but he heard the girl murmur in a low voice, "If you really want to give me a gift, give me a mirror, monk." He had decorated the pagoda quite comfortably, but he forgot to give her a mirror. She hadn't seen her own face recently, and she felt like she was withering away. A life where all he could do was play games. What an ordinary and boring life. The girl's soft voice carried a trace of complaint. "You really don't understand a woman's heart, monk." She finally saw a shadow of her former lively self. Ever since he locked her up and even hugged her, she always looked resentful towards him, and most of the time, she ignored him. After eating the lotus seed, Ning Chen's complexion looked much better, but the shadow of the heart demons still didn't fade. His inner demons would never be healed. It was as if she had regained her spirit, but when he stared at her, dark thoughts began to flourish. The cuter she was, the better. The more greedy he was. Ning Chen hesitated for a while and finally couldn't restrain himself. He lowered his head and kissed her smiling lips. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment before she frowned and wanted to turn her head away. But he reached out and held her face, not letting her escape. Finally, his breathing became heavy and he distanced himself from her. She was already blushing and said angrily, "Monk, control yourself. Don't say you can't control yourself. Where's your self-control when chanting scriptures?" Ning Chen's hair had grown a lot, but he had never taken care of it. His hair was scattered under his eyes, and there was a trace of suppressed heat in his beautiful eyes. Chapter 3007. His voice was hoarse and gentle. "I can't control myself when I see you. Why don't you recite the scriptures for me? I might be able to control myself." Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. She looked at him suspiciously for a while before reciting the scriptures in a low voice. As expected, Ning Chen did not move. He maintained this ambiguous position. He listened to her reciting the scriptures obediently. The girl's voice was soft. It was not as serious as it should be when she was reciting the scriptures. Then, the sound of her chanting suddenly stopped. Ning Chen lowered his head and kissed her again. "Wei Wei Bai, this monk was like a wolf or a tiger. Damn it, it was because he had been suppressed for too long that the floodgates opened and he drowned." She felt that she was going to become a demon. Because the strategy required a tool. After a few days, it was the discount period in the supermarket. So, she played games with the system while waiting for the discount. When she got the tool, it was almost time to leave. The days passed slowly for more than half a month. Bai Weiwei felt that her originally white skin had been whitened by more than one color. There was not much sunlight in the pagoda. The window at the top of the pagoda leaked that little bit of light. It was not enough for her to replenish calcium in the sun, causing her to feel that her bones were loose. So many times in captivity. The imprisonment this time could be considered to be a prison with no blind spots. Wei Wei Bai experienced the feeling of not being able to get out no matter how hard she tried. Ning Chen was as calm and experienced as a dog in everything he did. Don't try to fool him. Wei Wei Bai was silently counting the gold. Ning Chen, that guy. She wanted a mirror, but he did not give it to her. In the end, the next day, he started to bring her some gold, silver, gems, jewelry, and so on. What could these things do? She was at a loss. However, she saw the young man gently caressing her face and saying gently, "Demons like to store things. I didn't give them to you before because I was afraid that you would become greedy. Now that I know that you are greedy, I'll give them to you." Wei Wei Bai held the silver and gold in both hands. She felt that she was a fairy-like little demon. It was so tacky. Moreover, she was already locked up in here. How could she use these things to play marbles? Well, playing marbles was also a game. Therefore, she did not refuse. Ningchen liked to stay with her more and more, and he liked to touch her. It was as if he felt that every second he touched her was a second too little. He couldn't wait to hold her in his arms and caress her every day. Sometimes, Wei Wei Bai felt that she was a dough that was about to be kneaded into bread by Monk Ning. She looked around and saw that the basin had turned into a water tank. There were also lotus leaves growing inside for her to replenish her spiritual energy. There were tables and chairs, and the table was quite good. She bent over the table to play with the marbles, which were quite big. As for the young man sitting opposite him, he had a silent expression as he wrote scriptures. He saw the golden beads on the scripture. He reached out and brushed them away. Then he continued to write the scripture. His inner demons were so strong that even Buddha despised his desires. It was no wonder that he was the best guardian of Buddhism in the past 100 years. He's already fallen, yet he still insists on chanting scriptures. If it weren't for her, he would probably be able to return to normal again with his own strength after falling into the devil. Wei Wei Bai sighed in boredom. If it weren't for the strategy that was about to be completed, this kind of boring life was really cool. After Ningchen finished writing the scripture, he calmly closed the scripture. Then he stretched out his white fingertips. The light of Buddha fell into the scripture. The scripture suddenly burned, and the golden flames burned the scripture into golden light spots. He calmly took out a mirror from his sleeve, and the light spots entered the mirror. The mirror became clean and beautiful. The golden beads on Wei Wei Bai's fingers fell. She stared at the mirror. Then she saw Ningchen put the mirror on the table, took out a sandalwood comb, and slowly walked behind her. Then he gently reached out, held her hair, and began to comb her hair. Mirrors have many uses. For some demons, it's also an escape route. I'll seal it and give it to you. So he didn't give her a mirror before. Was he afraid that the mirror would give her a chance to escape? Wei Wei Bai didn't refuse his combing action. Instead, she held her face with both hands and stared blankly at the mirror. With a mirror, her life was complete. Ningchen saw that she liked the mirror, so he also lightly pursed his lips, revealing a gentle expression. He gently combed her hair. Suddenly he heard the girl say softly, "Monk, only couples get along like this." Ningchen's fingers paused. Then he heard her casually say, "You also have hair. I'll comb it for you later." Ningchen was silent for a long time before he gently continued to comb her hair. Then he softly said, "Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 96. Chapter 3008. The youth slowly opened his eyes. He touched his body with his fingers and the warmth beside him disappeared. He immediately got up, his face pale, but he saw that there was no one in the empty pagoda except for him. The mirror on the table was placed casually, but the demoness who passed by and sat there looking at the mirror was gone. In the empty pagoda, it was dark and lonely. His eyes trembled as he walked around the pagoda, looking for her. The darkness slowly eroded his body, following his footsteps. Every step he took, the viscous darkness flowed. He had locked her up so tightly. How could she escape? Ningchen looked at the tightly shut door and was about to push it open. But he heard a delicate and impatient voice calling him. "Monk!" Ningchen turned around in panic and found that he was still lying on the bed, and the person his fingers were grabbing was the girl he was looking for. Wei Wei Bai frowned and tried to pull her hand back. "Monk, just sleep. Why do you want to remove my arm?" Ningchen looked at her in a daze for a while before he relaxed and let go of her hand. The girl immediately rubbed her arm in dissatisfaction and muttered a curse at him. She looked alive. Still beside him. Ningchen's lips were pale with fright. He suddenly reached out again and hugged her. He hugged her tightly. He was afraid that she would disappear. His inner demon was getting stronger and stronger. The hell of the inner demon knew what he was most afraid of. She was missing. So every time he was pulled into an illusion, he couldn't find her. He continued to search even if he couldn't find her. The inner demon was at the side, laughing at him sinisterly. He was no longer the heartless person who entered the hell of the inner demon. Every time he fell into the inner demon, it was a real hellish torture. The girl was soft and fragile. She didn't resist, as if she knew that it was useless to resist in his arms. She just looked up and looked at him quietly for a long time. Then she said softly, "Monk, are you tired?" The youth's face was unusually pale, and the thick shadows under his eyes gave people an unusually haggard feeling. He rested his chin on her shoulder and didn't say a word. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything either. She just curled up in his arms and stayed there quietly. When Ningchen finally recovered from his inner demon, he suddenly heard the girl in his arms whisper, "Monk, why don't you just kill me?" His eyes trembled, but he saw that the girl had already rubbed her face against his chest. Her voice was incomparably calm. "Your shadow has already begun to grow. First, it turned into a dark color. Then, if he couldn't control it, it would become bigger and bigger. In the end, it backfired on him, causing him to go crazy." There was no trace of panic on Ning Chen's pale and indifferent face. He said indifferently, "You don't need to care about this." This was his inner demon. Of course, he knew how serious it was. However, Wei Wei Bai did not care about what he said. Instead, she enunciated each and every word clearly. "If you kill me, you will be freed from these inner demons. So, before you drive yourself crazy and become the scourge of the world, kill me to save yourself." Ningchen didn't respond. Instead, he reached out and stroked her hair. He sensed her presence and did not leave. The tiredness in his eyes slowly dissipated. While stroking her hair, he kissed her cheek. This was the comfort he instinctively sought after to dispel the fear in his heart after returning from the inner demon hell. Wei Wei Bai muttered for a long time about self-sacrifice. In the end, not only was the monk not moved, his actions became more and more outrageous. Chapter 3009. He kissed her for a while, then said in a low and calm voice, "If you really want to save me, then stay here and don't go anywhere." His inner demon was that she would leave, she would be killed by God's wrath, she didn't like him anymore. Killing her would only make him go even crazier. After saying that, he got up and walked out of the room with steady steps. The shadow behind him looked strange, it was terrifyingly dark. It was like a monster was waiting to come out and eat people. Wei Wei Bai lay on the bed and looked at the shadow expressionlessly. The shadow slowly revealed a hideous and twisted appearance, as if it was going to crawl out and pull her into the dark world. Ningchen didn't feel anything. He opened the door and let the sunlight in. The shadow was still so dark. It wasn't afraid of the sunlight at all. The door closed again. Ning Chen and his shadow once again disappeared from this lonely pagoda. Wei Wei Bai slowly reached out and twirled a strand of her hair, then said to the system, "Is the product on the shelves?" Monk Ning probably wouldn't be able to control the heart demon by himself. In a few days, Monk Ning would start to go crazy. She didn't have much time left. After counting for about 3.5 days, the time was almost up. The favorability was still at 96. The system flipped through the discount products on the supermarket shelves. "It's here, the bottomless pit absorption meditation sticker. The original price is 1,000 life points. It's already on discount, you can buy one for 100 life points." Wei Wei Bai nodded, "Just buy it." After the system clicked to buy it, he took out the game console and started to repair it. It couldn't be helped. Su Tong had been playing games all this time and broke the console. Now, one of them was repairing the console, while the other had nothing to do, thinking about how to get the last few favorability points. Everyone in the tower turned into moldy pickles. After Ning Chen came out of the tower, he heard the sound of the bell. He looked up at the sky. The faint thunder dragon was still in the dark clouds, faintly discernible. Because it couldn't find anyone, it became unusually gentle, dormant, and not scary. It just didn't leave. Ningchen lowered his eyes, coldly pursing his lips. He knew that it was impossible for Sky Law to leave on her own accord. He had trapped her in the pagoda for so long. She must be going crazy. Ningchen thought of Wei Wei Bai's lively and restless temperament. She had been suppressing it, but one day she might not be able to stand it anymore. Let's stay here for a while longer. After he died, no one would lock her up anymore. Ningchen slowly walked towards the spiritual pool. The spiritual pool was filled with mist. He took out the alms bowl and poured a large amount of spiritual energy into it. The old tortoise at the back of the mountain had also transformed into his human form these past few days and slowly came to find him. Your demonic thoughts have entered your heart. Why didn't you ruthlessly cut off the demonic thoughts? If you can overcome the tribulation of love this time, the power of your Buddha bone will reach great success. You won't have to worry about being tainted by filth anymore. The old turtle had some magical powers. 80 to 90% of what it said could come true. Ningchen's face was pale, and his dark eyes were unusually cold. What if I fail? His voice was faint and lifeless. The old turtle thought for a moment before saying, "You know what will happen if you fail. Why do you ask me? You have never asked such a childish question before." Sure enough, your heart wavered because of your deep love. Ningchen's eyes darkened, and his face became paler and paler. The cinnabar between his eyebrows was strange and gorgeous. Then he seemed to come to his senses and muttered to himself, "I will bear all the tribulations. I will not become a scourge to the common people, and I will not let her become a sorrowful soul under Sky Law. Before I die, I will take care of everything." // Collect below to record this reading record. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time, if you like. Chapter 30:10. The old turtle still wanted to persuade him. "Cut off the inner demon," Ningchen sneered. "I can't cut it off. Don't try to persuade me." If he could really harden his heart, he wouldn't have let himself fall to this point. No matter how bad it was, he would clean up everything. Ningchen steadily held the alms bowl in his hand and then walked step by step toward the 10,000 Buddha Hall. In the 10,000 Buddha Hall, he sat on a futon. The Buddhas were strict, and the huge power of Buddha began to pressure him. Ningchen was unmoved. He put the alms bowl in front of him, then stretched out his finger, borrowed the spiritual energy from the alms bowl, and turned it into a knife. He began to slowly remove his spiritual energy meridians. The spiritual energy meridians were the channels through which a person cultivated and absorbed the spiritual energy of the outside world. Without this meridian, one couldn't cultivate. When he removed it, it couldn't be seen from the outside. When the spiritual energy entered the body, he removed it bit by bit. The Buddha bone could be immune to all heavenly punishments. He wanted to remove the Buddha bone and then refine it into a magic weapon to protect her for the rest of her life. During this period of time, he had removed the spiritual energy meridians of his foot bones and hand bones. As long as he was given time, when he removed the complete spiritual energy meridians, he would be able to use the power he erupted before his death to refine the Buddha bone into a magic weapon. It would become a heart-protecting magic weapon in her body. At that time, she could go wherever she wanted. No one would lock her up and no one would chase after her. The heavenly punishment would also let her go. Even if she committed a great sin in the future, the Buddha bone would still protect her from punishment. With her personality, she definitely wouldn't like such an old-fashioned person like him. She wouldn't like him imprisoning her like this. In his last days, there wasn't much he could do for her. He could only let her go and protect her. No matter what purpose she had in the beginning to seduce him, he had sunk in. This was the truth. Ningchen's face was pale. He steadily cut off one of his spiritual energy meridians with his fingertips. Spiritual energy meridians were different from muscle meridians. Before completely cutting off the entire spiritual energy meridians, his physical activities wouldn't be affected. Only when he stabbed the knife into the acupoint between his eyebrows could he completely paralyze his whole body. The only effect might be that after the spiritual energy entered the body, it would overflow instead of remaining. As a result, his cultivation stagnated or even regressed. Under the supervision of the 10,000 Buddhas, the inner demons behind him wouldn't come out to rebel. Although to him, it was a terrible torture. Even in front of the 10,000 Buddha statue, the shadow behind him still refused to give up. It stretched out its pale hands and hugged him from behind. The black shadow turned into that familiar girl. "Monk, you don't want to let me go, right?" She was naturally charming, and her voice was full of emotion. "You just want to lock me up forever and turn into an artifact to protect me. Don't do such a stupid thing. If you die, I'll go find someone else. Are you angry?" Ning Chen's fingers paused. His face was expressionless, and he even started to waver. During this period of time, he had experienced love, resentment, jealousy, and anger. The inner demon was dragging him down with it all the time. If he really committed suicide, the inner demon would die with him. That was why it was trying its best to instigate him, to indulge their desires. Ning Chen only hesitated for a moment when the lotus flower on the Buddha statue suddenly emitted a golden light. The specks of light fell into the shadow. He directly pressed the black shadow down. And Ning Chen was also pressed by this force. His chest felt tight, and he felt something sweet in his throat. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The inner demon was himself, and he was the inner demon. So attacking the inner demon was equivalent to attacking him. Chapter 30:11. However, this kind of self-harming method finally stabilized his mood. He sighed slightly and continued to remove his own spiritual energy meridians. 3 days later, the blooming season of the spiritual pond would arrive. At that time, all the lotuses would bloom together, and the purifying air produced by the blooming would reach the peak of the spiritual energy of the lotuses. Therefore, he had to remove his own Buddhist bones first before he could release her from the pagoda on that day, and then refine the magic tool. Wei Weibai felt strange. After 3 full days, Ning Chen, the little bald donkey from the perpetual motion school, did not come. Could it be that he was bored, so he entered the sage state? Or was he tortured to death by his inner demon? The system also went out to take a look, but it did not see where the male lead was. However, it saw that the lotuses in the spiritual pond had all grown buds. For the first time, the 2 of them were looking forward to the arrival of the target. If he did not come, the time for the mission was almost over. This was the bad thing about being locked up. When it was time for the mission, if the target did not come, it would be a waste of time. Just as Wei Weibai and the system were discussing whether to spend a lot of money to buy a lock-opening tool to sneak out to find the person, the door of the pagoda suddenly opened. Wei Weibai almost jumped up from the chair, and then leaned on the chain wall, looking at him through the gap. Ning Chen saw the girl leaning on the chain wall, her beautiful eyes full of pitiful expectation. She pursed her lips, and the corners of her eyes turned red. He paused his steps, then walked over as if nothing had happened, and reached out to open the chain. She did not retreat for a moment, and her whole body fell forward. He reached out to grab it. Wei Weibai took the opportunity to hug him, and just as she was about to ask the system to take out the sticker, she found that her hands and feet had become smaller, and once again hung on Monk Ning's collar. Ning Chen reached out and let her stand on his palm. The little Wei Weibai looked at him with a puzzled face. Ning Chen looked at her quietly for a moment, and then said indifferently, "Come out with me for a while." Then he carefully held her and walked out. The sun was shining outside, and the sky was blue. Not far from the blue sky, there was a conspicuous dark cloud, and the thunder dragon was faintly discernible within. Seemingly sensing that the person whom it wanted to kill had appeared, the head of the lightning dragon immediately popped out and scanned its surroundings. Wei Weibai immediately shrank back. Ning Chen stretched out his sleeve and covered her. His voice was calm. "If you are so scared, why did you do such a great evil in the first place?" Wei Weibai really couldn't argue with the monk about this. After all, Sky Law was indeed targeting her, and she couldn't refute it even if she had 10,000 mouths. Moreover, she was busy reading the instructions for the new stickers that she had obtained. Ning Chen brought her back to the spirit pool. He stood on the calm water and placed her on a lotus flower. The lotus flowers in the spiritual pond had bloomed. In the dense spiritual energy of the water vapor, it was exceptionally beautiful. Wei Wei Bai sat on the lotus bud and looked at Monk Ning blankly. "Monk, why did you bring me here?" Ning Chen stood in front of her. His slender figure stood on the surface of the water as the prayer beads floated in the air. A trace of gentleness finally appeared on his cold and calm face. "In the future, you will be alone. Don't do evil anymore and don't seduce others." He placed more emphasis on the last few words. Wei Wei Bai had already studied the use of the sticker. She needed to touch Ning Chen to make it work. She stretched out her hand and was about to climb onto Ning Chen's body again, but found that she was trapped in the lotus flower. Her fingers couldn't reach out, and all her fingertips touched was a film-like enchantment. Chapter 30:12. Ning Chen has slowly squatted down. The young man with cold eyes and beautiful eyelashes gently droop. His voice softens. "I'll pick out the Buddha bone and give it to you. Then you can leave the tower and don't have to be locked up anymore." Wei Wei Bai is stunned at first, as if she doesn't know what the Buddha bone is. Then she comes to her senses and jumps up, reaching out to hit the thin barrier. "Wait, monk, what do you mean? Who wants your Buddha bone? Are you out of your mind? Let me out." The little lotus spirit jumps up and down in the barrier, but she can't get out no matter what. Ning Chen's face is indifferent. His finger gently slides in the air, and the Reiki of the pool turns into a blade at his fingertip. He looks at the blade. "I've removed all the Reiki meridians, leaving only the beer. This is the source of all the Reiki. If it is not broken, the Reiki meridians will still grow. And the Buddha bone can't be taken out." Ning Chen sees the little girl's face is red with anger, and she is violently struggling in the barrier. His heart softens and he can't help but smile. "In the future, you can be free." Wei Wei Bai's eyes are red. She looks at him blankly for a while, and suddenly tears flow down. "Monk, if you leave like this, what will happen to your baby in my belly?" Ning Chen's finger stops rubbing the blade, and then he seriously looks up. "No, we are different. Moreover, you are a plant. You can't have a child with a human." Wei Wei Bai purses her lips, and her eyes are full of tears. She cries miserably, "Then if I don't have a child, don't you plan to marry me?" Ning Chen is silent for a while, as if he has never thought about this problem. Wei Wei Bai is crying while digging the thin barrier. Bald Monk Ning is really a money burner. She spends another 10 days of life points to buy a small hammer. He bought a small enchantment hammer. Although it was small and concealed, it was a waste of time. She is delaying while digging the barrier. "You ruined my reputation, and then you leave. What will happen to me if you die? You want my body, and then you don't care about me anymore." Ning Chen felt that these words sounded a little fierce. He moved his lips and finally sighed helplessly. "My inner demons are getting bigger and bigger. Moreover, when my heart is moved, it is equivalent to a crack in my heart. In addition to the characteristics of the Buddha bone, if I continue to live, I will be tortured in the heart demon hell for the rest of my life. If it was just torture, it would be fine. What he was afraid of was that his temperament was unstable. What if one day he didn't pay attention? Then he would be controlled by his inner demons. When the time came, he would bring disaster to the world or hurt her. It was not something he could bear. After he left behind the best things for her to protect herself. This was the price he had to pay for coveting her. Ning Chen rubbed the tip of the knife and made sure that it was sharp enough. Just as he was about to aim the knife at the spot between his eyebrows expressionlessly, however, he found a hand grabbing his wrist tightly. He stopped his actions. Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled, but then he saw that Wei Wei Bai had become bigger. She broke through his enchantment and knelt in front of him with an angry face. The girl's fingers were so cold, and her voice was almost trembling. "Monk, who wants your self-sacrifice? How can you abandon me to fulfill your wish?" Ning Chen stared at her in a daze and saw that there were wounds beginning to appear on her face. They were wounds from breaking through the enchantment. She was too fast, and the wounds had just appeared. A trace of grief appeared in his dark and deep eyes. However, his tone was still indifferent. "Don't worry about this. After I die, You will know that I am just an insignificant light in your long life in a few years. Soon I will be extinguished. Fast. Chapter 3013. Bai Weiwei gripped his wrist tightly, refusing to let the knife in his hand point between her eyebrows. A tragic smile appeared on her fair and beautiful face. You're happy after death. How do you know that you're not the only light in my life? If I lose you, I won't have any light in my long life. Are you so confident that there will be another man who will love me like you do? Ningchen looked at her silently for a while before smiling slightly. You will. Maybe if you wait long enough, you'll meet me after reincarnation. He didn't know why, but he had this kind of confidence. It was as if he would love the same person for a lifetime of reincarnation. He wouldn't change this love because she was good or evil, ugly or beautiful, weak or strong. Weiwei Bai's fingers almost dug into his skin. As she cried, she said coldly, "Idiot, I said that I would purify you. I won't go back on my words. You're a coward who would die for a little demon." Ningchen was so calm that it could even be said that he was indulging her. Seeing that her eyes were red from crying, his heart finally ached. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her eyes, kissing her down along with her tears. It was like comforting, but it was more like saying goodbye. Sky Law was approaching. He wanted to protect her and protect her from being attacked by Sky Law. Compared to the inner demon, this was more important. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 98. Weiwei Bai heard the favorability prompt and also saw the thunder dragon of Sky Law above the spiritual pool, ready to move. She knew that Sky Law wouldn't descend, because Ningchen was here. But it could make Monk Ning make up his mind to remove his Buddha bone faster. She didn't expect that Monk Ning would take this path. Although she knew that with his personality, even if he became evil and the inner demon increased, he wouldn't become a real evil person. But she didn't expect that he was actually a saint. Weiwei Bai stretched out her finger, and a sticker that only she could see appeared on her fingertip. The ability of this sticker could absorb any desire, darkness, filth, and impurities. Then, it would be sucked into the bottomless pit of darkness and completely destroyed. She bought this toy not only to increase her favorability, but also because she thought that Monk Ning was not a bad person after all. She ate his food, drank his wine, took his mirror, and flirted with him. This could be considered as returning a little something to him. She was such a noble, kind, and beautiful person. Weiwei Bai could feel Ningchen's kiss leaving him. His low voice rang out, "My desire and darkness have intertwined to form a hell. No one can dispel it nor purify it." Ningchen's words came to a halt as his calm eyes trembled. However, Weiwei Bai was very calm. She reached out her hand and touched the cinnabar between his eyebrows, revealing a smile. "Who said I can't purify it? I have killed 100 evil men. I can absorb and purify the instant the darkness appeared. You are the only one who can refine it into a magic artifact. Can't I?" Ningchen saw the flower bud in her hair begin to bloom. It bloomed beautifully and beautifully, but it was close to Tumi's decadence. Ningchen's calm expression finally showed a trace of fear. "Stop. What are you doing?" She was still young. It was impossible for the flower bud on her head to bloom immediately unless her strength was exhausted. Weiwei Bai saw that it was almost time. She sighed slightly. The sticker on her fingertips had already connected with the monk, and the darkness of his inner demon began to disappear on her fingers. And her body was slowly turning into a lotus. The system said that when the attack time was up, the power to maintain her human form would disappear. And the sticker was stuck to the lotus. As long as Ningchen held the lotus, he would be purified. The lotus would not wither because it had obtained the #1 beauty in the world sticker. It looked like a super powerful purifying magic artifact. Weiwei Bai's body slowly lost its strength. She lowered her head softly and leaned on him. "Monk, I will become a purifying magic artifact and stay by your side, okay?" Although she was asking, she had already turned herself into the medium of the sticker, which was the lotus magic artifact in the eyes of outsiders. Her fingers gently rested on his shoulder, but she couldn't lift them, because she had become a lotus leaf. Her words became softer and softer, like the sound of the wind blowing. Ningchen reached out to grab it, but found that he was holding a lotus. And the little lotus was still whispering these words. She whispered, "In the future, you don't have to worry about your inner demon anymore. I will dissolve it for you. You don't have to worry about desires. I will absorb them for you. You are in hell, I will turn hell into a sea of flowers." Ning Chen's fingers were holding her leaf. He felt the dark aura of the Buddha bone, constantly flowing away. He moved his lips and found that something was flowing down from the corner of his eyes. Her words were too soft. He still heard it. "You don't have to suffer." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 100. Full text takes to download, comma. Chapter 30:14. Wei Wei Bai found that she had turned into a lotus. Fortunately, it was still the lotus with the world's #1 beauty sticker. She was still so beautiful that all the other lotuses had to lower their heads in shame. But she couldn't move. Wei Wei Bai, who was lying obediently in the lotus, was speechless. The system was updating the database. "Wait for me. I need to change the parameters before you can leave." Although the mission time was up, it was against the rules to stay in this world. But this time, the system didn't update the data in time, resulting in a time difference. Plus, the main and side missions were completed perfectly. Staying for a few days wouldn't be punished. The only consequence was that the host's soul couldn't move and could only stay in the place where she died. When she died, she was in the lotus, so she was now a beautiful lotus. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up. She couldn't move her body, only her eyes. But she found that she was placed on a plate. Above the plate was a huge Buddha statue. She looked up with effort and saw that she was lying on the altar. Didn't she become a purifying artifact? Monk Ning didn't take her with him. What happened to treating her like Xiaolan Tian? She had only died for a few days, but he threw her to the Buddha statue and let her gather dust as an offering. People turn into flowers after they die. He changed his mind when he couldn't touch her. If he didn't solve his inner demon, which little demon would he like? No, he went to read scriptures. Monk Ning loved to read scriptures the most. The system immediately looked around and found that the male lead really wasn't there. But since the mission was completed, there should be no need to worry about the male lead running around. He was a masochist anyway. After the mission was completed, he could go anywhere. Wei Wei Bai felt that Monk Ning changed his mind too quickly, but she wasn't worried. She couldn't move, so she could only follow the system to repair the game console. She watched the system repair the wires. Although she couldn't see where the system was, she could see the wires. She was so bored that she looked at the wires to pass the time. After looking at the wires, she poked her head out of the lotus and looked around. Although she couldn't leave the lotus, her soul could still attach to the lotus and look around. The place where the Buddha statue was placed was frighteningly empty. Countless Buddha statues of various shapes and sizes were placed on both sides of the hall. And the table she was sitting on just happened to be facing the largest Buddha statue. The Buddha statue was unusually compassionate, but it was cold and distant as it looked down at her. She didn't feel anything when she stayed in this place, but she did feel a chill. He stayed for about 2 days. The system had finally fixed the game console, but it would take some time for the database to be automatically updated. Therefore, she and the system were once again reduced to gaming nerds. She had no choice but to stay at home. She really couldn't go anywhere now. Wei Wei Bai was engrossed in playing games with the system. The system suddenly reminded her, Hey, the male lead is here." Wei Wei Bai snorted. "So what if he's here?" "He's definitely here to recite the scriptures. He loves reciting the scriptures the most. I'm second in line." The most beautiful woman in the world was always around him. In the end, if it wasn't for the fact that she sacrificed herself and moved him, he reckoned that it would take forever for her to gather 100 favorable impression points. When he saw her face, he couldn't help but give her a favorable impression of him. This was an insult to the title of #1 in the world. Saying that Monk Ning was a tortoise was already praising him. He was more like a tortoise basking in the sun. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about Monk Ning at all. It wasn't easy for her to clear the level, so she didn't want other miscellaneous matters to appear. / for the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 30:15. However, at the last second of clearing the level, she was suddenly picked up by someone. Then she failed the level and her game character died. Wei Bai looked up coldly and saw the young man standing by the table, his fair fingers gently pinching the crystal green flower stem. His features were cold, and his face was ghastly pale like a ghost. The white monk robe on his body looked a little loose. He felt as if his entire body had melted under the scattered sunlight, colorless. The redness on his thin lips had also disappeared. His bloodless lips were dry and thin like a piece of white paper, the only color left on his body. However, there was a beautiful cinnabar between his eyebrows that had no warmth. Wei Bai was held in his hand. She saw his slightly thin jawline, thin and shallow lips, and those drooping eyelashes that covered half of his eyes that were cold and dead. He reached out his fair fingertips and gently touched her petals. Still no reaction? He muttered softly without any emotional fluctuation. His hoarse voice was terrifyingly calm. Wei Bai lowered her eyes. Reaction? Ningchen glanced at the 10,000 Buddha hall and sighed faintly. Then, he carefully pulled her into his arms and covered her with his wide sleeves. He didn't want her to be exposed to the sunlight. Then, the young man walked out slowly and steadily. The shadow under his feet had become very faint. However, he could still see the color of his inner demon. The inner demon hell had been absorbed by her. He only had Buddha's heart and bones in his heart. This was the first time he didn't see this dark world since the inner demon hell appeared. He didn't need to fight with so many dark desires anymore. His world suddenly quieted down. The good and the bad were all silent. It was too quiet. Ningchen walked out slowly. All the monks surrounded the main hall. The leading old monk held a bunch of lotus leaves and stood far away. They all looked as if they had lost their parents. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Martial uncle, you have already taken a step forward. The inner demon hell has also quietened down. If you continue to cultivate, it will be good news for Buddhism. The old monk lowered his head and said respectfully. Everyone knew about Ning Chen's strange behavior during this time. Everyone was hoping that he could defeat the demonic will and continue to be the leader of the Thousand Origin Temple. After all, the reason why Buddhism and Taoism had been so strong in the past 10 years was because of Ning Chen, who had a Buddhist heart and a Buddhist bone. Finally, Ning Chen looked like he had returned to normal. Furthermore, his various abilities had also been enhanced, so of course everyone was happy. However, they didn't expect that Ning Chen would make such a decision, which made all of them feel disbelief. Ning Chen only glanced at them indifferently. Then, he continued to walk forward with his lotus in his arms. All the monks surrounded him but did not dare to stop him. They could only follow him. When they finally saw the gate. Finally, Ning Chen glanced sideways and stared at them coldly. Today is the day I return to the secular world. Just send it here. Outside the temple, the cold wind blew against the green bamboos. A white-robed youth stood in the wind, his features cold and exquisite. The old monk hugged the lotus and his face was full of tears. Senior uncle, why did you return to the secular world? There has to be a reason. There is no reason. This is your home. He grew up here. Everyone thought that he would stay. However, they didn't expect that he would suddenly leave. Without Ning Chen, who could defend Buddhism, they were so strong and united now because of his existence. Ning Chen was indifferent. He walked down the stairs step by step. /T. Chapter 30:16. When he was halfway there, he slowly turned his head and looked at the temple. His eyes were still calm and empty. Then, everyone finally heard his exceedingly calm voice. I've returned to secular life and married a wife. This was the last time the monks of the temple saw their abbot. Wei Bai stayed in the lotus and poked her head out. She saw Monk Ning carrying her and walking forward. The Dharma robe turned into a flying blanket. He brought her to the Taoists. The Taoists came out to welcome them and brought a soul-searching lamp. The system immediately blocked the host's soul. As expected, the lamp couldn't detect soul fluctuations. The light in Ning Chen's eyes slowly dimmed as the lamp was extinguished. The Taoist had no choice. He brought her to a distant corner to look for some big shots who cultivated alone. Everyone was very willing to help him. But all kinds of things couldn't turn his lotus into a human form. In fact, they couldn't find the aura of a soul. In a few days, Ning Chen found a bunch of people, but they couldn't get any reaction from her. Wei Weibai wasn't bored anymore. Although she couldn't move, she looked at so many scenery and so many people. It was also a kind of fun. Moreover, the system said that she could leave this plane in another day. Wei Weibai was even less anxious. Moreover, Ning Chen still looked very calm. Other than being a little thinner and having his hair a little longer, there were no other changes. It seemed that this monk wasn't the kind of person who would die for a woman. Wei Weibai was gratified. She had seen what happened in the plane after death a few times. Wei Weibai began to decrease the effect of 100 favorability. Perhaps 100 favorability was just the data produced by an ordinary person's love. Losing her, it wouldn't cause irreparable damage to his life. For example, suicide or something. Moreover, he wanted to marry a wife after returning to secular life. He probably felt that he had to find a woman to live with. He was really quick to recover from a blow. This wasn't bad. Wei Weibai thought calmly. She glanced at Monk Ning and found that he had walked to another mountain peak. There was a straw house here. Although it was small, it had all the essentials. It was enough for daily necessities. He scooped some water in a ladle and carefully washed the petals for her. It was as carefully as if he was washing her face. Wei Weibai couldn't move, otherwise she would splash water on his face. She had the #1 beauty on her body and a bottomless hole to absorb darkness sticker. She didn't have any dirt on her body and even had a super beautifying effect. There was no need to wash her face. After Ning Chen washed her petals, he entered the house. Bai Weiwei yawned, feeling that her soul was beginning to tire. She saw Monk Ning cutting the red cloth with a pair of scissors. Why was he cutting this? The system also Lu. You can leave now. Bai Weiwei glanced at Monk Ning and found that he was still silently cutting the red cloth. He seemed to be fine. So she said to the system, then let's go. When Monk Ning left her, he still had a calm expression on his face. His life didn't change at all. Perhaps it was the effect of her lotus purification. His heart was calmer, and he was more at peace. Wei Weibai slowly closed her eyes as she analyzed. The system bent down and slowly carried her soul out. It took a lot of effort to hold it in its arms. The little system wore a child's clothes and walked step by step towards the open passage. Ning Chen had also finished cutting the red cloth. He reached out and tied the red cloth to the lotus. This is your wedding dress, he said softly. The system stopped in its tracks and turned around to look. It saw Ning Chen reveal a gentle smile. His fingers gently touched her lotus petals. The young man's voice was still calm and gentle. I returned to the secular world and came to marry you. It started to rain outside. The young man's voice was faint. I just returned to the secular world. I didn't bring my belongings out of the temple. Everything has to start from scratch. Maybe you will have to suffer for a while, he said as he tidied up the scissors on the table. But I won't let you suffer. After tidying up, the young man quietly lowered his eyes. Then he stretched out his fingertips and gently stroked the petals. If you want anything, remember to tell me. At this point, the smile on his face finally disappeared. In the dripping sound of the rain, the young man sat quietly. Under his fingertips was the beautiful lotus. He was lonely like a ghost. He was not human at all. The system held the soul ball and calmly turned around. Then, it walked back without any hesitation. Chapter 30:17. The closer they were to the door of reality, the more vigilant the system became. Yushuan, who had turned into a monk, was as slow as old rock. He probably couldn't break free from his body and chase after them. So he had to face the neurotic Yushuan again. He reached out his small hand and hugged the white and soft soul ball, paying attention to the red line that extended out from the ball. The red translucent thread was long and sturdy, and it extended forward. Entering the darkness, they couldn't see the door of reality clearly. But seeing that the red line was loose, no one would think it was pulling. The system heaved a sigh of relief. That guy was probably sleeping again and didn't notice their arrival. Just as the system thought so, it saw the door of reality. It saw the border of the land of bones, almost to the side of the door. Just a little more and it would squeeze through the door. How could this be? Such a pile of bones. Were they taking out the trash? Did they have any manners? The system curled its lips and mocked the low quality of divinity. Then, just as it was about to take a step, its whole body stiffened. Because it saw a throne of bones, placed so casually at the edge of the land of bones. The throne that had always been placed on the peak of the mountain of bones, looking down on all the bones from above. So casually, so unpretentious, casually placed on the side of the road. And that cold, dead, inhuman, super dead-faced divinity Yuxuan was so calm, sitting on the chair, staring at him with a calm expression. The system, if it was on the mountain peak before, it was a god looking down coldly at the lower realm. But now it was a roadside stall, a sick young man sitting casually with a plastic sword at his feet, like a dog blocking the door. This was an illusion. Of course, it was only for a moment. The person sitting on the throne of bones still didn't move. His eyes were half covered under his eyelashes, and the golden halo was still dead and desolate. His beautiful fingers were casually placed on the armrest, a golden ring was hanging from his index finger, and a host's doll was hanging shakily below it. The beautiful man seemed to have fallen asleep by the side of the road. There was no reaction. The system hugged the soul ball, not knowing whether to go or not. This was deliberately making things difficult for him. This was because Hong Xian couldn't drag the host over, so she waited at the entrance all day long to stop them. Mother, what was the difference between this and a loafer who chased after girls? If he couldn't catch up, he could only block, wait, or wait at the entrance of the other party's house. Seeing that he was still asleep, the system immediately held Tuanzi carefully. Then, it tiptoed and slowly walked forward step by step. He walked to the edge of the line and was only one step away from crossing it. The system immediately retracted its foot, afraid that it would step into the land of bones. He saw that the man was still sitting there quietly, as if he was really sleeping. The system sighed and was about to step out when a piece of white bone fell from the border. It rolled to his feet. The system almost tripped over itself. He immediately held his breath, and the bone finally rolled to another place without making any other sound. The system heaved a sigh of relief, then carried Wei Tuanzi with its short arms and was about to walk forward. However, he found that something was wrong. Whose hand was that above his soul? His hands were on both sides of his body. The system's body stiffened, and when it looked up, it found that the sleeping loafer was still sitting on the chair. Chapter 30:18. In the background of endless white bones, the cold man bent down slightly, his fingers landing lightly on the soul. His eyes were filled with endless loneliness and calmness, like a fossil from ancient times, frozen in time. Following his movements, the solidification of the dried fossils gradually began to soften. The man's beautiful fingertips lightly touched the exterior of the soul. Little by little, inch by inch, he touched it so gently. It was like touching a delicate piece of tofu, he couldn't bear to break it. The system didn't dare to move. It was afraid that this big boss would poke his finger into the soul ball and damage its host's soul. Thus, a strange scene appeared in the soul passage. On one side was a land of weathered bones, and on the other side was endless darkness. There was only a crack of light in front, that was the door to reality. The little system hugged the soul ball, not daring to move. Just like that, the king from the land of bones reached out and stroked the ball. Was this stroking a cat? No, stroking a soul? The system roared in its heart. Are you done? Hugging for so long without daring to move, you'll get tired too. Did you purposely wait here to touch the host's soul? Do you have any ambition? The man was expressionless, his eyes were still cold to the point of emptiness. Only the strength of his fingers was unbelievably gentle. Finally, he seemed to have realized something, raised his eyelashes slightly, and looked at the end of the soul passage. In the endless darkness, something was slowly returning. Only then did he slowly and reluctantly withdraw his fingers. Then he continued to sit, his long eyelashes drooping, his eyes cold and silent. At first, the system didn't dare to move. It was stiff for a few minutes before it finally lifted its feet and walked step by step towards the door. The light of reality was approaching inch by inch. At the last few steps, the system finally dared to run faster and immediately rushed into reality. Then it stuffed the host's soul back into the body. It was afraid that the big boss behind it would go back on his words and do something irreversible. The system had just put down the soul, and before it could catch its breath, it saw Yi Yuxuan, who was hugging the host's body, calmly open his eyes. The system immediately widened its eyes. It couldn't be divinity again, right? The last time he used all his strength to seal Yi Yuxuan's body, it was to prevent the power of divinity from returning to her body. Could it be that it had no effect at all? If he were to seal it again, he would probably regress to the infant stage. At that time, the host would have to carry him and run away. He couldn't possibly bring the host's soul along with him. In the end, he was met with a pair of cold and dark eyes. It was okay if it was dark, but it was Yi Yuxuan with human nature. Just as the system heaved a sigh of relief, it realized that Yi Yuxuan was looking at it indifferently. Only then did the system realize that this big boss could see it too. The system smiled awkwardly. "Hello, you're awake." Yi Yuxuan, on the other hand, looked calm. She reached out and pulled the blanket over Wei Wei Bai. It was just an arm, so there was no need to be so vigilant. Furthermore, he still looked like a child. Yi Yuxuan sees that she is still asleep and knows that the soul will not wake up immediately after entering the body for a period of time. He then got up expressionlessly, walked to the living room, and found a pen and paper. The system was at a loss. "Big boss, what's wrong with you? Did you hit your brain when you transmigrated?" The system peeked out and saw Yi Yuxuan sitting on the sofa with his back to the light. His face was cold. He was holding a pen and writing. Line by line, it was written in ancient Chinese. Download the https://www.sashu.com/ download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://sashu.com/. Chapter 30:19. The system looked at it seriously. Scriptures. Yi Yuxuan was serious, and his eyes were still empty. The sound of cold snow whistling, green bamboo swaying, and flowers blooming seemed to come to his ears. But there was no sound of her. As he wrote, he fulfilled his obsession with her in that world. Then, he got rid of all his habits, pains, and excessive paranoia in that world bit by bit. In that world. After he married her, he took her all over the world. He became famous since he was young, and he intimidated demons when he was young. He revitalized Buddhism. He defended Taoism. He had done all the itinerant cultivators great and small favors. After returning to secular life, with this face and his excessive strength, he borrowed or got all kinds of the best tools. But none of them could make her return to her human nature. He even returned to the temple to look for the old turtle's prophecy. But the old turtle said, "Her past life and present life are all white. No one can see it. This is a strange phenomenon. Maybe I'm not capable enough." He asked why she had become like this. The old turtle looked at him for a long time and finally sighed. "Don't deceive yourself. This is not your character. The last heart you have is the heart she has." He used the Buddha bone to refine a magic artifact. He could still preserve his soul and reincarnate. Wasn't it because he could still meet her in his reincarnation? But that little lotus spirit didn't have a substitute like the Buddha bone. And he could refine himself into a magic artifact that could purify a hell. He could only use his soul. And it was a soul with superior purification ability. That was why there was such an effect. Thinking of this, the old turtle sighed. I misunderstood that little girl. You are infatuated, but she is even more infatuated. Who isn't stupid? You got this infatuation for nothing. He stood by the old turtle's pool for a long time before slowly walking away with the lotus in his arms. When he walked to the long bridge, he saw that the lotus was still in full bloom. But none of them could compare to the flower in his arms. He seemed to be able to see the little girl standing on the lotus with a smug look on her face. Monk, am I beautiful? Ningchen stared blankly at the lotuses in the spirit pool. Finally, he lowered his eyes and tugged at the corner of his lips, revealing a bitter smile. Beautiful, he said softly. I've never seen it before. There is nothing more beautiful than you. She did everything she could to protect his Buddhist heart, but he was still haunted by his inner demons. Although it was not a hell, because every time he hugged her, she would absorb the dark aura from his body. Later on, he couldn't bear to hug her for fear of hurting her. But he felt extremely sad when he couldn't hug her. Sometimes he would put her in the water, afraid that she would wither without water. Sometimes he would look at her from afar, wanting to leave her in the land of purity and then leave. Then she would not be able to absorb the darkness from him. Later on, he realized that he wasn't that magnanimous and willing. She was his. He would not put her in a place that he could not see or touch, or even to anyone. Later on, he found a method in the Buddhist scriptures of the temple. It was said to be a sincere prayer, and he had to write down 10,000 reincarnation scriptures. He could summon her remnant soul. He was already starting to age, and he didn't have much time left. The materials used for the scriptures, the pen, the paper, and the ink were all not ordinary materials. He used all kinds of methods to obtain these materials. He began to accompany her, writing the scriptures seriously and piously in the old forest. One by one, each word consumed his essence chi. Chapter 30-20. Autumn came and the leaves fell. It fell on the scripture. He slowly reached out and brushed it away. Winter came and the heavy snow pressed down on the roof. He was afraid that it would be too cold and she couldn't stand it, so he sewed a warm cloth bag for her overnight. Then he held her in his arms and began to write the scripture. Snowflakes fell on the scripture, and he blew on them. Spring came back to life, and flowers bloomed. Birds flew in to peck at his scripture materials. He used a barrier to separate them. The pages of the soul-returning scripture were just pieces of longing. 10,000 pieces? Summer seemed to have come. He leaned on the table and looked out of the window with half-closed eyes. The pen in his hand was still tightly gripped. This was the last piece. He still needed the last piece. Suddenly, he heard something slowly climbing up the window. It was her delicate sigh. Monk, the window is so high. I'm tired of climbing. He slowly looked up and saw the summer light shining in. The little lotus spirit sat on the window. She held her cheeks with both hands and smiled. Monk, you still like scriptures the most. You're still writing. He couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile. No, I'm writing about you. A lifetime of 4 seasons, every sentence is about you. The pen in his fingers finally fell. Then he closed his eyes. He didn't finish writing the scripture. Only the last piece was left. Yushuan also slowly wrote the last word. He stared blankly at the last line of scripture. The complicated scripture, the strange yet familiar handwriting. It wasn't him, but it was also his. Yushuan finally exhaled lightly. Then he put down the pen, picked up the paper, and walked to the kitchen to burn it. Then he poured 2 cups of ice water to suppress the boiling emotions from the previous world. Then he slowly walked out. When he walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps and posture finally returned to normal. It was no longer the monk's posture. Then he returned to the room and saw Wei Wei by sitting up, rubbing her eyes and muttering something about the system. When she saw him, she was immediately stunned. Then her eyes became clear again. Yushuan nonchalantly walked over and gave her a set of clothes. He reached out to touch her hair, but realized that his hand gestures still carried the rhythm of that world. He immediately changed his posture and patted her head with his finger. You're awake. Get up and eat some porridge. Wei Wei Bai reached out and rubbed her head. she was still in a daze. After all, she was a little dazed after sleeping for so long. Then, she finally remembered the last time she left. Yes, he saw Yi Yuxuan's calm expression. Wei Weibai also looked calm. When he went to make a call to get someone to deliver fresh vegetables, Wei Weibai also ran to wash up and change her clothes. Then, she stepped on her plush slippers and walked out calmly. Everyone was doing that. This was the typical state of cohabitation. It was no longer a pure relationship between a man and a woman. The system was munching on high-energy chocolate to replenish its body fat when it heard the host mumbling to himself. It couldn't help but say, "When have you ever been pure?" There was no need to talk about his body. His mind was a complete mess. He didn't misunderstand the two of them, right? Every time they were together, he would be blocked out many times, and he was not sure. Wei Weibai touched her face. "Sigh, it's my own fault for being impure. To prevent similar things from happening again, I should move out first." Then, she turned and walked towards the kitchen. However, she saw Yi Yuxuan's calm expression. He was wearing an apron with his sleeves rolled up. He was holding a kitchen knife as he was preparing a fish. He turned and looked at her calmly. Then, he said gently, "You're hungry. Eat some porridge first. The food will be ready soon." Wei Weibai blinked and looked at him again. Then, she nodded blankly and went out again. After she went out, she leaned against the wall. No, I don't have any other thoughts when I see him. At the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 3021. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www. Sashu.com. In Baidu to find the S. Look at him standing in the kitchen, so handsome, wearing an apron. He gave off a criminal sense of abstinence, and also had the temperament of a good wife. She really couldn't bring herself to say that she wanted to move away. The system comforted her. "I also think it's better if you don't say it." The host's face was full of vicissitudes. Yes, if you leave, you won't be able to eat his food, see his face, and sleep in his arms. The system said, "No, I'm saying that he has a kitchen knife in his hand. If you suddenly leave him, he might think that you're going to break up and kill you." This was not a joke. Yi Yuxuan's mental state was not normal at all. Normally, she would go and write scriptures. That was suppressing the primordial demonic thoughts in his body. The host's face was gentle. "How can you say that about Xian Xian? He's such a good and gentle person." The system, "A good and gentle person?" Cough, 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 cough. If the host thinks he's a good person, then he's a good person. Sure enough, after a night's sleep, she's glued to him. Heh, women. Wei Weibai was playing with the system when she heard the doorbell ring. She stepped on the plush slippers and calmly went to open the door. Was the person who bought the groceries back? She opened the door and saw a familiar old father outside. Bai Changyan's 2 hands were full of groceries, snacks, and drinks. When he saw that Wei Weibai had woken up, he was not surprised. After all, waking up once every 3 days had become a daily occurrence. He immediately squeezed in. "Son-in-law called someone to buy groceries. I had nothing to do, so I bought them myself and came over to freeload." "No, I'm here to see you." Wei Weibai, freeload? Seeing her father's happy face, it seemed that Yi Xianxian's culinary skills had conquered him, including her. Wei Weibai followed behind her father and reached out to take out a bag of chips from the supermarket bag. Then, she tore a corner of the bag and began to leisurely nibble on the chips. "Where's Dr. Qin?" she asked vaguely as she ate. Bai Changyan was walking towards the kitchen. "Did you forget? Didn't he go on a business trip abroad 3 days ago for a surgery? But the surgery went well, and he should be able to return tonight. Tomorrow is New Year's Eve. Have you prepared the New Year's goods at home?" Wei Weibai leisurely threw another potato chip into her mouth. No. She had forgotten about the new year. After all, if the system had not deliberately blurred out some memories of the world he had transmigrated to during this period of time, he would not have been able to do so. She felt like hundreds of years had passed. He had aged a lot. He was talking about his heart, not his appearance. "Bai Changyan, let's eat first. There's no rush to prepare tomorrow." After all, there were only a few relatives during the new year. Due to the special circumstances of the Yi family, Yi Yuxuan was basically the only one in charge. He didn't like gatherings or special meetings. As a result, the Yi family was now incomparably mysterious, and no one dared to jump out at all. Even those who jumped out were dealt with. Even Yi Yuxuan, the leader of the group, didn't like crowds, so no one dared to overdo it. Therefore, there was no need to visit the Yi family's relatives. As for the Bai family, when Bai Changyan was young, his business had encountered major difficulties and was on the verge of bankruptcy. It looked like he was about to be in debt. At that time, all his relatives became ingrates, and no one was willing to lend a helping hand. And they even added insult to injury. After Bai Changyan survived that, he even brought the company to another height. Those ingrate relatives came over again, intending to continue to freeload off him. Bai Changyan had also gotten over it and kicked all of his relatives out of the room. Chapter 30:22. Not only did he kick her out, but he also broke off the relationship. From then on, there was no such thing as visiting relatives during the new year. So the Yi family was a bit similar to the Bai family. It was not lively during the new year. Bai Weiwei gnawed on potato chips while looking into the kitchen. She saw Bai Changyan put down the things. Yi Yuxuan came over to take a look, then stretched out her fingers and took out the fresh vegetables. The nanny and the cook didn't come today. Maybe they didn't have enough time. Yi Yuxuan did it herself. The man who took out the vegetables seemed to notice something. He raised his eyelashes slightly and his eyes fell on the potato chips in her hand. Weiwei Bai didn't hide it. With a calm face, she took out a piece of potato chip and put it to her mouth. She saw Bai Changyan bend down to open the drink bag with his back to her. She showed a smile, then narrowed her eyes and looked at Yi Yuxuan generously. She licked the potato chip casually with the tip of her tongue, and the charm in her eyes was full of addiction. Yi Yuxuan's fingers paused, and her face was a little sluggish. Bai Changyan just took out the milk and looked up to see Yi Yuxuan's stiff face. He frowned and looked back in confusion. What was so surprised to see? When he turned around, he saw that his daughter had already turned around and walked away while eating potato chips. Bai Changyan coughed lightly. Weiwei liked some snacks since she was a child, junk food. Later, because of heart problems, she couldn't eat too many of these high-calorie and high-sugar snacks. Now that her body is better, it's okay to let her occasionally satisfy her cravings. After all, the snacks that he and Qinqiu brought several times were thrown into the trash by Yi Yuxuan. Although he knew that his son-in-law was thinking for his daughter, Weiwei really liked it. He and Qinqiu also liked it. So they bought snacks and put them in the refrigerator. After all, the place where they stayed now, except for their own sleeping place, was Yi Yuxuan's place. It was simply a gathering place. Without snacks, it would be less fun to pass the time. Yi Yuxuan lowered her eyes again and glanced indifferently at the bag of snacks. In the end, she didn't say anything and took out the snacks indifferently. Then he began to classify them. In the fridge, in the cupboard. As for those that were too stimulating and spicy, he threw them away. After finishing everything, he turned around to get a bowl of porridge and said calmly, "She just woke up. Her stomach is still sleeping, so she must be weak. It's better for her to eat something soft first." After saying that, he took out a spoon and carried the bowl out. Bai Changyan was touched. This was his son-in-law. He was cold and didn't talk much, but he was considerate. After Yi Yuxuan walked out, she saw Weiwei Bai turning on the TV. Weiwei Bai was sitting cross-legged on the sofa, eating potato chips with her head down. He walked over and put the bowl down. Weiwei Bai was eating potato chips and was a little thirsty. She saw that it was plain porridge, the kind that was especially thin. Just as he was about to take it to drink. In the end, a hand suddenly pressed on her shoulder, and she looked up strangely. However, she saw Yi Yuxuan calmly stretch out his other hand and pinch her chin gently. She was about to say something, but it was too late. The man lowered his head and kissed her slightly uncontrollably. Her breathing was messy, and the man's dark eyes were half closed, filled with a burning light. She was about to struggle, but he calmly held the back of her neck, making it impossible for her to escape. Weiwei Bai's breath was taken away. She only felt that all she could feel was this man's breath. It was burning hot, with a hint of uncontrollable violence. This kiss didn't last long, but it was a little too strong. Wei Wei Bai's lips were hurting, and only then did he leave her with a hint of desire in his watery eyes. "Don't be so reckless in the future," he said in a low voice, so hoarse that it hurt her eardrums. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched her red lips. She frowned and was about to refute. In the end, she saw Yi Yuxuan reach out and touch the corner of her lips. His thin lips curved slightly. "I don't have any self-control when it comes to you now." Chapter 30-23. So she teased him at will. It was no longer his forbearance. It was a crazy grab. Wei Wei Bai understood. Because she had just traveled through a plane, the time span was a bit long, causing her memory to be a bit fuzzy. But Yi Yuxuan was not. For him, it was only about 3 days ago. And a man who had sex had no self-control at all. Yi Yuxuan saw that she knew what the consequences of her behavior would be, so he calmly reached out and took the chips in her hand. "If you understand, then eat the porridge and nourish your stomach. These snacks can only be eaten after you're full. Eat the porridge to nourish your stomach. Then finish eating. Only then can you eat snacks." If it was before, maybe Wei Wei Bai would teach him not to restrict people like this. But thinking of Yi Yuxuan's wolf-like appearance just now, her lips still hurt a little. Forget it. Wei Wei Bai immediately, like a little wife, picked up the bowl and began to eat the porridge. Can't provoke, can't provoke. Yi Yuxuan turned around and left with a calm face, returning to the kitchen again. After he left, Wei Wei Bai sighed with the soup spoon. Xian really became a lot more overbearing after that. The system was eating the steak with a blank face. Did he? Hasn't he always been like this? The host may feel that the male lead has changed. But for others, isn't the male lead still that expressionless cold robot? Wei Wei Bai watched the Super Mario Kart on the TV. Forget it, there are no snacks but porridge. This cartoon is really good. After watching the cartoon and eating the porridge, the doorbell rang again. Wei Wei Bai saw that the kitchen was still busy, so she leisurely went to open the door with her hands in her pockets. Then she saw Qin Qiu carrying big and small bags. He probably came directly from the airport. He squeezed in with the bags and said, "I'm starving. I knew it was definitely dinner time. I didn't even eat the first-class meal and immediately came. Xuan's cooking skills are really good." Everyone was here to freeload. Wei Wei Bai calmly took the bags and put them aside. When Qin Qiu saw her clearly, he immediately smiled and said, "I knew you woke up today, so I came to see you. I didn't even eat." Wei Wei Bai smiled politely. He was clearly here to freeload off Xian. The thickness of his skin was comparable to her father's. After Qin Qiu came back, he immediately went to wash his hands and face. Bai Changyan also came out with the rice cooker. The rice was cooked. The soup was ready, and the last dish had just been cooked. Wei Wei Bai didn't want to be a giant baby, so she picked up the spoon and prepared to scoop the rice. Qin Qiu grabbed it nervously. No need. I'll do it." After saying that, he observed the spoon for a moment, as if he was afraid that there was poison on her fingers. It couldn't be helped. Wei Wei Bai's ability to send people to heaven was too deeply rooted in people's hearts. Everyone was traumatized when they saw her holding the culinary items. They were afraid of collective food poisoning. Wei Wei Bai sat back with a calm face and waited for the meal. It was refreshing to not have to work. Yi Yuxuan also came over with the last dish of soup and put it directly in front of Wei Wei Bai. She also liked the soup. Basically, 9 out of 10 dishes on the table were her favorite. Then Yi Yuxuan pulled out a chair and sat beside her. The man's sleeves were not down, and his wrists were clean. She glanced at it casually and felt that it was pleasing to the eye. Yi Yuxuan also calmly glanced at his wrist, at the red line. Read the full text. Download the full text. Read the full text. Collection below to record the reading record. Chapter 30-24. The translucent thread hung in the air, extending all the way to Bai Weiwei's wrist at his side. He glanced sideways to make sure the line was fine before turning back. During the meal, Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan ate with a calm face. What else could they do except eat? Wait for others to give them food? If they had the time to fantasize, it would be better to eat. If they didn't eat, Yi Yuxuan would give all the good food to his wife. Bai Weiwei felt that eating a hot meal really made her whole body feel refreshed. After the meal, the aunt who came to help also came. She also bought a bunch of vegetables to fill the fridge. Every time Weiwei Bai woke up, the smell of home was there. Food would also be prepared a lot each time. Weiwei Bai ate and drank to her heart's content, and felt that she came back to reality to eat, drink, and sleep. Days with a family and a man were warm. She turned on the TV again and turned on the children's channel. Tomorrow was New Year's Eve. The children's channel was also full of New Year's programs. There were lanterns everywhere, and a bunch of children were running around playing games. Weiwei Bai saw those children and suddenly felt that she had overlooked something. Then she calmly reached out and covered her abdomen. Hey, my real body can get pregnant, right? The system was opening the package. This was a snack gift box set with a variety of varieties. When it heard the host's question, it answered smoothly. Of course, it was more difficult for you to get pregnant because your body was weak, but after so many planes of success, your body's condition has improved a lot, and getting pregnant is much easier. It was Weiwei Bai's previous body. Not to mention getting pregnant, it was difficult to keep a life for 20 or 30 years. Now it was easy. Although her current physical condition was not as strong as an ox, she was still healthy. It was just a little short-lived. Other than that, there was no difference. Of course, pregnancy was also a normal state. Weiwei Bai finally realized that when she did that with Yi Yuxuan, there was no condom. After all, the two of them had been flirting with each other for so long, and everyone was holding back and didn't go further. Therefore, he didn't realize it at all. He had to prepare this thing and keep it at home. What a blunder! If there really was one, he would have to stop transmigrating. After all, he couldn't just go with a baby in his stomach. While you're sleeping here, you're having fun over there. Wasn't the child malnourished when it was with her in her stomach? What if he starved to death in her stomach? Weiwei Bai nagged the system a lot, just like Mrs. Xianglin. She was so worried that her little brows were furrowed. The system scanned her body and was about to tell her that she was not pregnant. However, he saw that Yi Yuxuan had already walked over. He immediately cowered and hid under the table, his small hand holding onto his snack delivery. Yi Yuxuan only glanced at the little fellow indifferently. Her eyelashes were half closed, and her eyes were cold and clear. Then, he walked over to Weiwei Bai and saw that she was staring at the TV with a frown. He looked over as well. A bunch of children were playing a little game that he didn't even want to play when he was born. Was it painful for her to watch such a program? Yi Yuxuan was about to pick up the remote control and change the channel. However, his arm was suddenly grabbed. He was slightly stunned. He turned around and saw that Weiwei Bai was like a koala. She leaned over and hugged him fiercely. He was a little confused and quiet. Seeing her helpless expression, he couldn't help but reach out and gently stroke her head. What's wrong? Could it be that something big had happened that she couldn't solve? Weiwei Bai was silent for a while before biting his shoulder. Yi Yuxuan was used to this and was abnormally calm. Then, he heard Weiwei Bai's muffled voice. What if I'm pregnant? Yi Yuxuan's mind went blank. He couldn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Is at https://www.sashu.com/. Chapter 3025. Yi Yuxuan's mind went blank. He couldn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Pregnant? Pregnant? Was she pregnant? He was actually a little confused and was still a little unfamiliar with this question. Whether it was this world or many other worlds separated by dreams. They were all people who had never had children. He paid too much attention to what children meant. After all, he couldn't understand such childish creatures like children. When he was a child, he couldn't understand. When he grew up, he couldn't understand. But if it was his child with Weiwei Bai, the man's eyelashes drooped slightly, and a rare look of confusion appeared on his fair face, making him look unusually innocent and cute. Weiwei Bai was still biting his shoulder. It was neither light nor hard, more like flirting. She muttered, "It's all your fault." Yushuan thought of what happened that day. She was the one who flirted. Of course, he couldn't control himself after that. So, Yushuan immediately nodded and said calmly, "It's my fault." Wei Weibai hugged him with a troubled expression. "What if there's a child?" Yushuan thought for a while and said calmly, "Give birth to it and we'll raise it." Wei Weibai looked conflicted. "I'm still a child. How can I raise a child?" And wasn't she still doing a mission? If there was a child, it would be over. Yushuan stroked her hair and comforted her patiently. "It's okay. I'll raise it. If you want to play with it, you can play with it like a toy." Children were toys. Wei Weibai finally let go of his shoulder after she was done. Then she regained her composure and said, "I don't think there's a child. After all, my body hasn't fully recovered, so the chances of getting pregnant aren't high. And you were outside a few times." Except for the first time, he couldn't control himself. He only controlled himself when she found it sticky the next few times. Yushuan looked at her calmly, but his ears started to heat up. It wasn't shyness, it was purely anger rising. He put her on the sofa and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't say any more. Be good." His current body really couldn't resist flirting. Wei Weibai also immediately shut up. Looking at his appearance, she guessed that he was about to turn into a wolf. Yushuan heaved a sigh of relief and kissed her forehead to quench his thirst. "That's not a problem. No matter what needs to be done, I'll take care of it. You can do whatever you want." He wanted her to be carefree. Freedom. He was responsible for all her worries and troubles, so that she could live a peaceful life. Wei Weibai also smiled. "Yes, if we have a baby, we can't live together." She fell back and leaned against the sofa. She looked at the children on the television and said with a smile, "I think it's time for Xuanda's father to get married." If they were married, it wouldn't be considered cohabitation. They were a real family. Yushuan's deep eyes quietly stared at her for a while. A trace of gentleness appeared on his handsome face. He seemed to be unable to suppress it, and his thin lips gently raised. The man's smile was too gentle. This smile was filled with warmth that came from the bottom of his heart. His voice lowered. "Yes, okay." Wei Weibai was also stunned. After all, Yushuan didn't smile much. Although he had a lot more micro-expressions. But he still had very few big expressions. This smile stunned her. Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan went out after eating, and when they came back, they brought a mahjong table. "It's going to be the new year. Prepare the new year goods." Mahjong table, was it a new year goods? The mahjong table was a simplified version. The table was not cumbersome, but the heavy mahjong table. Chapter 3026. Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan were tearing apart the packaging outside of the mahjong tiles. The two men with a difference of more than 10 years were almost like 3-year-old children. Yushuan, on the other hand, was indifferent. He sat next to Bai Weiwei, sorting out the work documents brought by Changyan. Wei Weibai had already seen Super Batman, Boonie Bears, and Team Woof Woof. Oh, the cartoons that the child has been watching recently are so good. Wei Weibai was eating snacks while watching TV with her legs crossed. Occasionally, she would take a look at a stack of documents from the table. It had been too long since she looked at them. Better leave it for Xian. So Bai Weiwei's face was calm. Just like her father, she silently stuffed the document back. It's not that she can't do it. She was the acting president, maintaining the operation of a company with a weak body. She was also a strong woman with more than expected profits. But after reading too many documents, she had a headache. It's not that she was lazy, it's that her body was not good. Well, I'll have to trouble Xian. Team Woof is still better. Wei Weibai was eating snacks with a peaceful face, and then she heard the sound of the system secretly eating snacks. She didn't ask how much life points the system spent on snacks. After all, she was rich now, and the system had to eat more. So now she didn't ask why the system ate a bunch of things every day. She just occasionally told it not to buy expired food, it's not good for the body. Wei Weibai saw Team Woof's advertisement and changed the channel. There were some nostalgic channels where she could see Neza makes trouble. She looked first. Then she suddenly thought, she didn't know if the system could see inside her body. She slowly called out to the system and didn't expect it to answer. When Yi Yuxuan was here, she didn't know what it was afraid of, it just didn't say a word. After death, it didn't admit that it was afraid of Yi Yuxuan. But why was it afraid of Yi Yuxuan? Wei Wei Bai calmly lowered her eyes, her smile unchanged. Yi Yuxuan, the system probably knew a lot of things that she didn't know. She trusted it and never asked. But that didn't mean that she didn't realize that there was a connection between them. She still couldn't find any clues about this connection. Currently, he knew that Yi Yuxuan was a gold mine of HP. But to say that the system had nothing to do with Yi Yuxuan. Wei Wei Bai slowly threw a small biscuit into her mouth. Forget it. The system wouldn't harm her. If he had any secrets, or if Yi Yuxuan had any secrets, they could tell him if they wanted to. It was fine if they didn't want to. Her family's system was something she had to protect. He thought that there would be no response, but he heard the system's small voice. What happened? Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. There was actually a response. She smiled. Am I pregnant? All Yi Yuxuan could hear was the system's voice. When Wei Wei Bai was communicating with the system, he couldn't hear Wei Wei Bai's question. So he heard the system carefully reply, no, you really aren't. If you want to do it next time, you can try the inverted position. Yi Yuxuan's signature pen paused. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, oh, I'll try it next time. Yi Yuxuan didn't hear Wei Wei Bai's voice. But he heard the system's voice again. Yes, you can try it, but your body has been sleeping for too long. Your muscles and bones aren't strong enough. Remember to stretch more to maintain your body's flexibility. This kind of difficult movement won't hurt your bones. Yi Yuxuan's signature pen slowly continued to write. But his mind was already calmly forming a conjecture. Not pregnant. Wanna do a handstand. Maintaining a supple body was extremely difficult. He lowered his eyes and suddenly felt the tips of his ears heating up again. Chapter 30:27. He used to be able to endure it, but now it's really a headache challenge. He calmly continued to sign. Occasionally, he listened to the words of the life that accompanied her. When the mahjong table was assembled, Qin Qiu immediately arranged the mahjong tiles quickly and called Wei Wei Bai, come and play mahjong to try your hand. The TV station just happened to be advertising. Wei Wei Bai, who had nothing to do, immediately jumped up from the sofa, then put one hand on Yi Yuxuan's shoulder and carelessly touched his hair with her fingertips. Play mahjong to relax. Mahjong was a four-person game. Qin Qiu dared to call her because he was sure that she could call Yi Yuxuan over. Yi Yuxuan's pen tip paused, feeling the touch of her fingertips, soft and flirtatious. Then he put down the pen and naturally closed the folder. The business was almost done. He let her lead him to play mahjong. She should still watch TV, playing mahjong for a while would be enough. Yi Yuxuan silently calculated the time, and then determined that there was enough free time in the evening. Well, it was enough. As a result, Yi Yuxuan, who had always been accurate, ignored the role of inertia. The inertia of playing mahjong was addiction. Touching, throwing, like a demon, and then rolling up her sleeves without any concept of time. The man sat in front of the mahjong table and said calmly, it's almost time. Wei Wei Bai, who was struggling to touch her 3 legs, immediately stopped him. Who said it's almost time? Let's play all night. Yi Yuxuan, Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan also excitedly echoed, let's play all night. Yi Yuxuan's face was a little cold, then he slowly raised his eyes to look at the two of them. Attending Dr. Qin and father-in-law Bai immediately cowered and bowed their heads to touch the mahjong tiles. Anyway, Wei Wei Bai said that she wanted to play all night. Yi Yuxuan couldn't stop it. After another half an hour, the man finally indifferently lowered his eyes, his fingers carelessly touching the brand-new mahjong tiles. Everyone was in high spirits. He didn't notice Great God Ye's expression at all. After that, everyone kept losing and kept losing. Right? Except for Yi Yuxuan. Everyone had lost. Games were only fun when there were wins and losses. Therefore, when Yi Yuxuan started playing, She had already calculated how casual the game would be and arranged the probability of winning and losing for everyone. Now, he felt that it was better to take back this probability. He had arranged for everyone to lose, so there was no chance of winning. In the end, it was Bai Changyan who put away the mahjong tiles. It's getting late. We'll be leaving first. If he didn't leave now, his son-in-law would win his underwear. This son-in-law was not human. Other people's son-in-law would think of ways to let their father-in-law win so that they could happily marry their daughter to him. On the other hand, he was probably thinking of using the move of losing. He would force his father-in-law to lose his daughter to him. Qin Qiu also had a bitter face. He walked side by side with Big Brother Bai, who was in the same boat as him, and went back to their respective homes. Wei Wei Bai held her face with both hands. Her face was full of dissatisfaction, and her anger was similar to that of a blowfish. Yi Yuxuan slowly began to arrange the mahjong tiles. Her white fingertips, contrasted with the green tiles, were exceptionally beautiful. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai snatched the mahjong tiles back, revealing a malicious smile. Let's play a guessing game. What do you think this is? She casually pushed out a covered mahjong tile. Yi Yuxuan looked up indifferently, then said in a low and calm voice, 10,000. Wei Wei Bai turned over the tile. It was true. Was this guy human? Chapter 30:28. Then she narrowed her eyes and smiled. You've won. Take off your clothes. Yi Yuxuan was silent for a while before he pursed his lips and tugged at his collar. The man didn't ask why she had to take off his clothes. Because they were indoors, he was only wearing a white shirt. His beautiful fingers unbuttoned the buttons one by one, revealing his long and fair neck. The calm man lowered his eyes. As if he didn't notice, there was a hint of obscurity in his eyes as they landed lightly on her face. This slow seduction. Wei Wei Bai couldn't take it anymore. The mahjong tiles in her hands fell onto the table. Then she swallowed her saliva silently and stopped herself from acting rashly. After Yi Yuxuan took off his thin clothes, his face was still calm. Do you still want to play? Wei Wei Bai coughed lightly. Not anymore. Damn it. She had only chased everyone away because she was angry at him and didn't let them play mahjong. So she wanted to flirt with him. In the end, she felt like she was flirting with him instead. Yi Yuxuan reached out calmly and held her slender wrist. He said calmly, we can continue playing. If I win, I'll take off my clothes. If you win, you'll take off your clothes. Is this the rule? With that said, he casually touched a covered tile with his other hand and said softly, what's this? Wei Wei Bai felt that his fingers were very warm. She didn't have X-ray vision. But if she lost, she didn't have to take off her clothes. Why not guess? So she casually made a guess. In the end, Yi Yuxuan pursed his lips slightly and seemed to be smiling. Then he calmly flipped open the tile. She guessed wrong. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. She thought that Yi Yuxuan would cheat and let her win. Fortunately, she lost. So she immediately smiled and said, I lost. I don't need to be punished. The punishment of this rule was unreasonable to begin with. The winner would be punished instead. Yi Yuxuan, on the other hand, had a calm expression. Then he released her fingers. Under the light, his beautiful upper body was as beautiful as jade. He lowered his head, his fingers resting on his belt. Wei Wei Bai immediately stopped him. Wait, what are you doing? Yi Yuxuan raised his eyelashes slightly, his beautiful black eyes deep. His voice was a little hoarse. If you lose, doesn't that mean I win? It's time to undress. Wei Wei Bai, that's right, he won and took off his clothes. If she lost, wouldn't that mean that he won? But don't take it off. He was only wearing a pair of simple pants and a shirt. It would be immoral if he took it off a few times. She immediately pushed the mahjong tiles away. I'm not playing anymore. I'm not playing anymore. Yi Yuxuan had succeeded in completely destroying her playfulness. A hint of a smile appeared in the man's eyes. It was not obvious, but it was very gentle. He replied indifferently, yeah, I'm not playing anymore. Then he casually picked up the shirt and put it on. When he buttoned up the shirt, he could clearly see that Wei Wei Bai's face was a little redder. There was also a soft sigh of relief. She saw that he had returned to normal. Wei Wei Bai quickly packed up the mahjong tiles, then got up to wash her face and calm down. When she came out of the bathroom, she saw that Yu Xuan was packing up the last of his work documents. The side of the man's face under the light had a delicate beauty. There was a hazy light on his eyelashes. Wei Wei Bai could not help but cross her arms. She stood at the side and watched for a while before smiling. The coldness and discomfort left in her heart because of the transmigration. It was melting away bit by bit. She sighed softly. It was so good. Who had a better life than her? She should have died without dignity. But because of this fortuitous encounter, she felt that she had everything. Yu Xuan sensed her gaze and gently raised his head to look at her, his eyes gentle. Wei Wei Bai was about to walk forward when the doorbell rang. When the doorbell rang, she saw that Yu Xuan was still busy, so she ran to open the door herself. It was Yu Xuan's personal assistant. When the two staff members saw that it was her, they immediately smiled warmly. "Hello, madam. This is what young Master Yi wanted. We're here to deliver it." They respectfully handed over a box. Then, they obediently bowed and retreated. They smiled warmly and said, "Goodbye, madam." Wei Wei Bai felt that the staff members' smiles were too polite. "Madam? Aya, what a beautiful title." Wei Wei Bai hugged the box and walked in a good mood. Yu Xuan had already closed his fountain pen. He looked up and saw the box in her hand. Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "It's yours." Yu Xuan paused and said softly, "No, it's what we want to use." Wei Wei Bai asked casually, what is it?" Yu Xuan had already slowly stood up. His back was facing the light and his eyes were deep. As if he was suppressing something, his voice became more languid. "Didn't you say that you don't want to have children for the time being?" Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then she suddenly reacted. This box, oh, she knew what it was. Chapter 30:29. After knowing what it was, she opened it calmly and took a look. There were all kinds of colors and tastes. There were even some weirdly shaped ones. Fuck, Xian, what's wrong with you? Why are your tastes so weird?" Yu Xuan saw that she was opening it, but his face was still calm. Then he got up. The man's slender figure slowly enveloped her. Wei Wei Bai hugged the box and was silent for a while before suddenly turning around to leave. Suddenly, her waist and back were aching and her legs were cramping. So, this matter was put aside for a while. After this thing in the box was used up, it would dry up. It would dry up just like the chili peppers hanging on other people's balconies. In the end, Yu Xuan reached out and touched her waist gently. He leaned over and then lowered his head and rested his chin on her shoulder. Wei Wei Bai was stubbornly calm. "Have you showered?" Yu Xuan was silent for a while before replying softly, "Yes." Wei Wei Bai suggested, "You can shower again. There are frozen carbonated drinks in the freezer. If you feel hot, you can pour it over your head. No, you can drink it." The man behind her was burning hot. Although his face was calm, his body was honest. This was what it meant to be inwardly passionate. Yu Xuan did not say anything. He calmly raised the hand that was holding her waist and took out one of the boxes. His voice was low. "I don't know if the size is right." Wei Wei Bai could not help but twitch her mouth. How could it be wrong? Indeed, Yu Xuan's voice was a little hoarse. "I'll try. If it's not right, I'll go back." Wei Wei Bai's face was red. An experienced driver could not compare to a new road killer. She was still driving carefully, but he knocked into her and made her dizzy, causing her to get into an accident. Wei Wei Bai's voice was trembling. She felt that she was being challenged like never before. "I'm a little tired, huh?" Yu Xuan's voice was calm, but there was a hint of laziness. "Okay, I'll carry you to rest." Just as Wei Wei Bai was about to refuse, her entire body was forcefully lifted up in a princess carry. Actually, this position was really hard to bear. A man's weakness was that if she hugged him halfway, it was possible that her legs would go soft. She would rather his legs were weak now. But when she touched his chest, the faint lines of his muscles were so tight and hard that it was frightening. She silently retracted her hand and hugged the box of unspeakable items with a calm expression. Sigh, This car accident happened too quickly. The impact made her dizzy. He watched as the moon rose and slowly set. One night, the entire night. One night. Time has passed. Why did she use an exclamation mark? Because Wei Wei Bai indicated that she had stayed up all night with Yi Yuxuan. It was like he was addicted to playing mahjong. He would not be tired at all if he could play excitedly the whole night. Wei Wei Bai woke up the next day and held her waist. Sure enough, his waist was sore, his back hurt, and his legs were cramping. She silently shed 2 lines of tears. She suddenly regretted forcing Yi Yuxuan, an honest man, to retaliate. She did not flirt with him. He would not have been able to hold back and would not have opened this mouth. Once he opened this mouth, it was all good. Just like a dam releasing water, a cold shower could not stop it at all. Only she could stop it. And Yi Yuxuan really did not understand the principle of small streams flowing for a long time. He only had 2 kidneys and he still had to use them for decades. If he did not protect himself when he was young, he could only hold his osteoporosis waist and cry when he was old. The system was blocked for an entire night. Damn, he did not even know why he was blocked at all. Ever since his second brother, that shameless trash, had changed the rules, the comments on the screen had gone crazy. Chapter 30:30. Didn't he just watch mahjong for a while last night? The host was cleaning up the mahjong tiles and he was blocked. What? Playing mahjong at home was considered gambling. He couldn't watch anymore? The system was complaining when it saw its host wrapped in a blanket, her hair messy like a bird's nest. She looked haggard and thin. After not seeing her for a night, why did the host look like she was drained dry? System. So it wasn't mahjong that was blocked, but this. The system couldn't help but advise her, take it easy, don't damage your kidneys just because your heart has just recovered. You're still young, you're still young. How can you be so indulgent? You'll lose more than you gain if your body is emptied. Wei Wei Bai huddled under the blanket silently, her face full of despair. You're right. That was what she said to Robot Yi. However, the man's back was facing the dim light, and he slowly stretched out his finger and rubbed his moist, thin lips. The corners of his eyes were slightly red, and his gaze was deep. I'll control myself. Wei Wei Bai hammered the bed when she thought of this. In the end, his idea of control was completely different from hers. His idea of control was to control himself after one night. Her idea of control was to control herself after one time. Wei Wei Bai thought of those things, and her face was full of vicissitudes of life. Forget it, I'll be fine after drinking more treasure of kidney, I'll sleep a little more, a night without sleep is not good for the skin. The 3 words one night were too much information. The system faced it calmly. It was no longer the obedient child who blushed in front of a few pictures of female models in bikinis. After all, following a host like this, it was experienced and knowledgeable. Wei Wei Bai had transmigrated, absorbed Yi Yuxuan's life points, and various subsidies to maintain good health. When she really woke up, her legs were weak for a while. Fortunately, Robot Yi had all the functions, including a one-stop service for bathing, cooking, and hugging. During lunch, Bai Weiwei's entire body came back to life. She saw Yi Yuxuan holding a laptop and looking for all kinds of dry goods. Then she thought of the New Year goods. Over the past few days, more and more people had come to deliver food. They were all relatively expensive fresh fruits. There were also some necessities for the new year, such as spring festival couplets. Wei Wei Bai saw that Yi Yuxuan was actually shopping. This website was a niche site that catered to the high-end crowd. If you place an order for something, it will definitely arrive today. Wei Wei Bai watched as Yi Yuxuan did something that she had never done before. She felt that it was a little refreshing. Moreover, the Lunar New Year was just for the liveliness. She reached out, hooked Yi Yuxuan's collar, and tugged at his buttons. The handsome man gently raised his eyes, his gaze gentle. If a person likes another person, you can't hide your eyes. Wei Wei Bai also smiled, and the gentleness in her voice could hardly be hidden. Let's go out to buy some things and enjoy the new year. Yi Yuxuan had no objections. After closing the laptop, he held her fingers and said gently, okay. Wei Wei Bai wore a woolen hat and the same sneakers as Yi Yuxuan. She calmly pushed the supermarket shopping cart. Yi Yuxuan was also dressed much more casually, wearing a cap. He wore a simple thin winter coat, black trousers, and a pair of sneakers that were the same style as hers but different in color. The two of them looked like a couple. Not to mention the sweet atmosphere that pervaded the air of passion. But whether it was the way they dressed or the way they walked, they had a tacit understanding of each other. They were harmonious and warm like the most dazzling scenery in the crowd. Address of the full text: https://www.sashu.com// Download of the full text: https://www.sashu.com. For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 3031. The supermarket was huge. On the shopping street. Next door was the shopping mall. The dry goods area of the supermarket was filled with dry goods from all over the world. Because it was the new year, the place was packed with people who came to buy things. Wei Weibai felt that the smell of the people, the smell of the new year, was simply overwhelming. Yi Yuxuan still had a calm expression on his face. It was as if no matter how crowded the crowd was, there would always be an empty space around him. Wherever he went, no one dared to come near him. Even when he squeezed into the lively dry goods area to get dry goods, those aunties immediately blushed when they saw him. Then they made way for him. Wei Weibai pushed the shopping cart behind and waited in amazement. Then she heard a few aunties chatting beside her. This young man is so handsome. You can't find anyone who is brighter than him in 10 miles. Doesn't your daughter have high standards? Go up and ask if he has a girlfriend. Before they could finish speaking, Wei Weibai had already gone over and said calmly, "Sorry, he's taken." In the end, when the aunties looked up, they were blinded by this beautiful girl. Not far away, there were people discussing. This girl is so beautiful. I wonder if she has a boyfriend. Damn, during the new year. All the blind dating maniacs in the aunties group were mobilized. Why was she and Yi Yuxuan more popular than dry goods? Yi Yuxuan was picking up a bag of red dates to check the place of origin when suddenly, the corner of his clothes behind him was grabbed by a fair and soft hand. His gaze was calm as he looked back. Wei Weibai said with a smile, "Have you thought of what to buy?" Yi Yuxuan threw a bag of red dates into the shopping cart and then calmly took a bag of wolfberries. Then there were shiitake mushrooms, tofu, dried scallops, dried squid, dried prawns, sea cucumbers, flour glue, after throwing in all the sea and mountain goods. His expression was calm as he held her hand naturally. Then with the other hand he pushed the relatively light shopping cart. She walked past the aunties who were muttering about whether Wei Weibai was with her friend's auntie. Yi Yuxuan suddenly stopped and looked at them calmly. Then he was silent for half a second before he said coldly, "Sorry, she's taken." Wei Weibai was stunned for a moment before she couldn't help but laugh. His ears were quite sharp. The murmurs of a few people in the crowd could be heard. When Yi Yuxuan saw her smile so carelessly, she couldn't help but reach out and pat her woolen hat. She threw the hat under her eyes. Wei Weibai immediately reached out and lifted her hat, only to see the man in front of her, standing in the crowd of the supermarket, handsome, with a few traces of smile in his eyes. He had never thought that Robot Yi would one day be covered in smoke and fire. She hooked his finger. "What else do you want to eat during the new year? How about hot pot?" As expected, she heard the obedient man say in a calm voice, "Okay." They bought a lot of things and filled up the shopping cart. When they went back, they saw Qin Qiu putting up Spring Festival couplets. Bai Chang Yen and the auntie who came to help were selecting vegetables. Yi Yuxuan silently rolled up his sleeves and planned to make a hot pot soup base. Then, Wei Weibai had to be driven to see Peppa Pig. Kitchen killer was a description. But she was the real deal. Can't afford to offend, can't afford to offend. Wei Weibai hadn't felt this kind of excitement in a long time. In the smoke of the hot pot, Yi Yuxuan sat beside her and washed mutton slices for her. She cooked some shellfish for him. The atmosphere between the two of them simply made everyone else into the background. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 3032. By Chang Yen silently picked up the strawberry juice and casually touched the orange juice cup on the table. Happy New Year. Old Father Bai's face was calm with a sad smile. Dr. Chin also picked up the orange juice and touched it back. Cheers. Sai, this is love. Eating hot pot with no one to help, why did it feel a little lonely? A whooshing sound came from outside the window. It was the fireworks. Wei Wei Bai gave Yushuan a hot tofu and said, Happy New Year. Yushuan lowered her eyes and was scooping meat for her. Hearing her words, she also said softly, Happy New Year. This New Year was lively and comfortable. After eating, they started playing mahjong. Big Boss Yi might have eaten half full last night, but he did not spoil the mood on New Year's Eve. He made everyone lose until they were too ashamed to see anyone. However, it was not good for him to help his wife win every day. On New Year's Eve, everyone stayed up late happily. The Spring Festival Gala was playing on the TV, and it was an unforgettable night. They looked at the sea of fireworks outside the window. Wei Wei Bai was tired from playing mahjong, so she went to get a glass of ice water and drank while squinting. Then she said softly, Tongzi, is it full? The system answered as expected, it's been full for a long time. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Then let's go. The system said, Why don't we leave after the new year? Wei Wei Bai glanced at Yushuan, who was walking towards the door to open the door for Bai Changyan and Qinqiu. Her voice was faint, but there was a sense of helplessness. I can't help it. Little Demoness Yi is too seductive. If we don't leave, I might not be able to bear it. She could not bear to let go of him and leave this place. She could not bear to let him down. But she had to. She could not bear to let go of how he felt when she died first. If she really wanted to love him, she would have a good cup. Then she would have to send him off. Every time she would die early. For the man she loved, she had to live a long life and love him. Wei Wei Bai whispered, I love him. I can't bear to see him in despair and pain. You could say that she was selfish, but she was the kind of person who would do anything for the people she loved. He could even trample on other people's feelings. He just wanted to live on. She's a bad person. He was just a lucky bad guy who was loved. The system was silent for a long time, and then its voice was a little hoarse. It's almost done. Endure a few more planes. A total of 175,000 HP. In exchange, he was close to 48 years old. She was only in her early 20s, and with these lives, she could live until she was 68 or 69 years old. It was not enough. If he wanted to live a long life, he would need another 20 to 30 years of lifespan. The system raised its hand. In its young palm, its strength had deteriorated. But he still said, I will fight for a better plane and try my best to make your body able to withstand more than 2,000 external life points. 2,000 HP could be exchanged for more than 5 years of life in each plane. It could speed up her fate of not having to transmigrate. She was too tired, and the road she had taken was too long. He could not bear for her to continue like this, to continue enduring the torment. She was the only host that had not lost a single battle. She was also the only person who could reach this point in a situation where she was poor and had nothing. In the system's heart, she was fully deserving of being the king. The one and only, irreplaceable forever. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Happy New Year. The system also smiled. Happy New Year. Then she slowly closed her eyes. The system hugged her and once again walked into the dark road of transmigration. Button. Chapter 3033. After Yi Yushuan sent father-in-law Bai and Qinqiu out of the door. He walked back with steady steps and saw that she was already sitting on the sofa, leaning against the back of the sofa and falling asleep. Did she go to those dream worlds again? Yi Yushuan looked at her silently for a while, then bent down to pick her up and walked into the room. After covering her with the quilt, Yi Yushuan lowered his head and kissed her. Then the man's voice was calm, but with a trace of hoarseness. In the new year, please advise me. When Wei Wei Bai woke up this time, she had a splitting headache. It had been a long time since it hurt like this. Even the pain of the memory input was something she was accustomed to. This kind of pain was actually not so terrible, but it was a little strange. She squinted her eyes and struggled to get up, only to find out why she had a headache. Because she was drunk. Her drunk head felt like it was followed by water, oppressing her nerves and causing her IQ to drop. She covered her forehead and her throat was dry. She didn't know how long she had been drunk. The room was full of a strong smell of alcohol. She glanced around casually. There were beer cans under the messy bed. The window was half open, and the cactus in the flower pot grew lush grass. Then she looked at the various star photos on the wall. Most of them were little fresh meat, and some of them were bare-chested. The room was very messy, and even a pile of garbage was not thrown away. This place was simply the home of an otaku. She rubbed her eyes and felt the smoothness of her face. No, she reached out and wiped the makeup off her face. Wei Wei Bai's face immediately darkened. She dared to sleep with makeup, didn't she want her skin? She immediately held her forehead and went to the bathroom dizzily, intending to wash the poison off her face. Without good skin, how could she be a beauty? Without a beautiful appearance, how could she capture and complete the task? Her ability to capture was not very good, and she could only win by relying on her appearance. As a result, when she looked up in the bathroom, she experienced the feeling of being struck by lightning for the first time. Who was the ghost in the mirror? Her explosive blonde hair and the thick makeup on her face made her look like a street girl. She hurriedly felt around with her trembling fingers. Thank goodness. There were no nose studs, ear studs, or chest studs. Otherwise, she would explode and switch bodies. She looked at her scary makeup and suddenly didn't dare to wash her face. She was afraid that once she washed, her original appearance would be even scarier than without makeup. If she wasn't ugly, why would she wear such makeup? It was to use ugliness to cover up ugliness. In the end, Wei Wei Bai overcame the worry in her heart and lowered her head in despair to wash her face and remove her makeup. When she was finally done, she was still calmly lying on the wash basin. Ugly or not? Not ugly, still ugly. As soon as the system arrived, it saw the host lying on the wash basin like a corpse. He was scared out of his wits. He thought that he had been killed by the side quest again. There were no more side quests to be had. He couldn't kill them in the previous plane. The random raid quests for this plane were also stopped. Only the beginner missions would be issued. Generally speaking, these were accepted by beginners. There wouldn't be any missions that were so scary that they couldn't be completed. They could finally settle down in a plane. But the host was so half-dead. Could it be that the side quest left behind some terrible backup plan? He called carefully, Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai then responded in a muffled voice, Am I ugly? Chapter 30-34. The system immediately flipped open the book that the narcissist was boasting about, cleared its throat, and read aloud. Your beauty is the pearl of the universe, the only light in the black hole. When the millions of creatures in this universe see you, they worship at your feet and worship you as the goddess of beauty. You are the god of beauty, the Buddha of beauty, the hallelujah of beauty. These words sounded like a hallelujah. Wei Wei Bai suddenly raised her face full of confidence. The face in the mirror, the palm-sized face, was abnormally pale, the kind of pale that was unhealthy from staying up too late. Her almond eyes were hazy, but there were dark circles under her eyes. Her skin was delicate, but there was no healthy color. A head of yellow hair. Not to mention, her facial features were perfect, but her skin was all kinds of scars caused by lack of attention all year round. As a beautiful little fairy. If her skin did not leak water, she would not dare to see people. Before he asked for the memory, Wei Wei Bai said, Buy, I want to buy skincare products. Otherwise, she would be autistic, wither, and become a mushroom. She had no confidence in the strategy. The system silently pulled out the supermarket shelf. It exchanged a bottle of Essence skincare water for her, sprinkled it on, and guaranteed that no matter how bad the skin was, it would be clear. Then, it got some super long-lasting face. One piece was worth 10 years, and guaranteed that your skin would be beautiful, and transparent no matter how you looked for death. Although it was a little expensive. But now he had money, and he drew a few thousand life points from the side table's account. They were all rewards from the side table's hard work in mining and whipping. Most of these rewards were taken by it to pay the bank interest, after holding on to its qualification of not being destroyed. The rest was its coffin book. It was still delusional to think of saving money back. When it wanted all the wealth in his bank account, it was completely trapped by him. Its bank account password was also taken advantage of by him. Anyway, it did not have the chance to come back and change the password. So, its whipping money was used to buy beauty products for its host. The system looked calm. The reward for your side task in the previous plane has been given, and it happened to be a beauty set. Then he bought the most expensive 10-year facial mask, skincare essence. He threw it at the host's face. Wei Wei Bai looked at her skin and saw that it was getting better. She even heard that the facial mask could maintain her beautiful skin for about 10 years. She calmly said, "Sai, with my professional skincare experience, I don't need 10 years. I can make the skin 30% better in one skin cycle." If it wasn't for this body. One look and one could tell that she had been staying up late for a long time, drinking, courting death in all sorts of ways, and had never removed her heavy makeup. Even the skin couldn't be made to look like this. If his skin was any weaker, his face would probably be rotten by now. Wei Wei Bai caressed her little fairy's smooth and beautiful skin. Only then did he calm down and say, "Begin the memory transfer." This sentence represented the beginning of the mission. Although he and the system were both old salted fish and greasy old employees. But this time, the host was clearly more spirited. It seems that the host wants to end this transmigration as soon as possible. The system immediately flipped through the database and transmitted all the information. Wei Wei Bai, who was used to the pain of transmitting memories, had a calm expression on her face. The girl in the mirror had delicate eyebrows and eyes. The original owner's decadence and sadness had all faded away. The dazed almond-shaped eyes also became clear and affectionate. Her unconsciously seductive appearance came from the depths of her soul. After she finished reading the information, she calmly raised her eyebrows. Looking at herself in the mirror, she chuckled softly. "Little delinquent girl?" To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 3035. This time, it was not related to the world of high-level demons. It was an ordinary modern world. This time, her identity was a super rebellious little delinquent girl. She had just failed the college entrance exam and relied on her connections to enter a university. This was an opportunity that others dreamed of. To her, it was nothing more than her so-called brother who had no blood relationship with her. He was her brother. In fact, they had nothing to do with each other. The only connection she had with him was the only connection she had with him. It was the original owner's mother who fell in love with this unrelated older brother's father. Yes, they were just dating. The original owner's mother was a famous social butterfly. She had a good face and the heart of a vixen. When she was young, she played in the brothels for several years. She was extravagant and spent all her money. Then, she was old and could not continue to make money from rich people. By chance, she met a middle-aged widowed man who had a clean style but a solid family background. This man was Fu Qian. Fu Qian had a simple life, a good family background, and was an academic. He could not resist the original owner's mother's seduction. Then they naturally developed into dating, living together, marriage. No, they were not married yet. But Fu Qian's son was exposed. Fu Yuheng, who had planned to go abroad to further his studies, came back because of this matter to deal with it. Compared to his father's naivety, Fu Yuheng was obviously much calmer. He looked at his father's enthusiasm coldly and did not do anything. But he made a rule with his father that they could not get married within a year. And he would not do anything more in this year. If his father still had this kind of enthusiasm after a year, then he would agree to their relationship. Even a marriage contract. Fu Qian was afraid that his son would get used to it. So he agreed. Reading up to this point, Wei Wei Bai touched his chin and asked casually, "Is the target of the strategy Fu Yuhen? Otherwise, the information in front would be his information." The system nodded. "Yes, I will organize the information for you." I also organized the male lead's information. Wei Weibai nodded and continued reading. Fu Yuheng's 3 rules suppressed the original owner's mother's plan. However, it was rare to meet an honest person with a good personality and identity. She really couldn't bear to give up, so she could only patiently coax Fu Qian. He planned to get married in a year. And in this context, the original owner appeared. She was rebellious, had a strange sense of beauty, and was always courting death. After the original owner's mother lived with Fu Qian, she couldn't bear to throw her daughter away. Since the house was big, he let her move in. But after she moved in, she stirred up trouble every day. Fu Qian was so angry that she almost ended up in the hospital a few times. Fu Yuheng, who had recently gone abroad, had not seen her. When he came back last night, he happened to see her and the little hooligan drunk with a pile of wine. He planned to drink at Fu Yuheng's house. After Fu Yuheng chased the hooligan out, he saw Wei Weibai, who had a head of yellow hair and terrible makeup on her face, cursing. She was drunk and ignored Fu Yuheng. Instead, he ran back to his room and continued drinking. After that, she turned into Wei Weibai. When Wei Weibai saw this, she couldn't help but rub her temples. Such a stupid person. I haven't seen her in a long time. She really wanted to slap her, but now that her face was perfect because of her reward, she couldn't do it. Chapter 30-36. Wei Weibai continued reading. She realized that Fu Yuheng had deliberately come back to drive her away. When he went abroad, he called the original owner to pack her luggage and get out of his house. But the original owner mocked him and said that if she was given a place in an advanced school, she would give up stirring up trouble in his house. In the end, Fu Yuheng was silent for a while before saying softly, "Okay." The original owner thought it was a joke. But after the college entrance examination, she really received the notice. The original owner's college entrance examination results were so bad that it pulled down the national average. This university notice was obviously given to her by Fu Yuheng through his connections. And the price was that she had to pack her luggage and leave this place completely today. Fu Qian had already been encouraged by her vixen mother to travel abroad and shop at various luxury stores. After all, the vixen mother was a wily old fox who had rolled in all kinds of brothels. It was obvious that Fu Yuheng was the one in charge. She couldn't afford to provoke him. She didn't dare to provoke him and threw her daughter away. She followed her teacher and went out to avoid Fu Yuheng's limelight. She planned to get married after a year. The information this time wasn't so outrageous. At least it introduced the families of both parties and some simple information about Fu Yuheng. Character, appearance, and so on. She just had to observe for a while more. Wei Weibai stood in front of the mirror and sorted out the information before calmly going to take a shower. The yellow hair was exploding because the original owner had dyed her hair and didn't take care of it after perming her big wavy hair. Plus, her sleeping posture was a mess. After Wei Weibai took a shower and her hair was smooth. She realized that besides the color being too eye-catching, it wasn't that exaggerated. It was just that the quality of the hair was too terrible. Wei Weibai held her long hair speechlessly. She really wanted to break it. This kind of hair didn't match her face. So she put on her coat and walked out of the bathroom. She said to the system, "Is there any good hair conditioner?" She really couldn't stand the messy hair. She didn't know how bad the living habits of this body were. She was only 18 years old and didn't have the vitality of a young girl at all. Her face was full of pimples and her hair was like a steel ball. The system silently took out the best hair conditioner from the supermarket. I guarantee that the hair will always be bright, smooth, soft, and beautiful. Wei Weibai finally managed to make herself presentable. It was hard to notice anything strange about this kind of change. At most, it would feel clean. This kind of cleanliness brought about the tenderness of a young girl. She calmly asked the system, "Is Fu Yuheng at home?" The system answered, "Yes, it's in the room on the 3rd floor." She nodded. "Okay." Then she threw the jacket away, revealing the towel wrapped around it. She walked to the 3rd floor and looked around. The Fu family was indeed very rich. People who didn't know much about money wouldn't be able to understand the low-key but rich decorations. With a calm expression, she came to the door of the room and knocked on the door. She was a delinquent girl. She was embarrassed to be too reserved. The person inside was silent for a while, as if he didn't want to talk to her. Just as she was about to kick him, the door creaked open. He even locked the door. It seemed that he was guarding against her. Wei Wei Bai crossed her arms in front of her chest and adjusted her expression, making it look rebellious and dissatisfied. She looked up and met with a pair of beautiful black eyes. The young man was tall and slender. The door was half open, but he didn't lower his head as he stood behind the door. Instead, he looked down indifferently. His eyes were deep, with a hint of carelessness. His gaze fell on the young girl casually. His gaze was slightly sluggish. The young girl just came with a simple towel wrapped around her body. Her action of crossing her chest was unusually casual. Her face without heavy makeup was unusually small. Her fair and delicate skin had a hint of redness after a bath. Because her action was too rough, the lines of her shoulders and neck were exposed, thin and unusually delicate. Wei Wei Bai, who had always scared people with her ghostly appearance, was clean and beautiful without those scary outfits. The young man was silent for half a second before calmly looking away. "Are you leaving?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe and coldly curved her lips. Her tone was casual. "Relax for a few days." The young man still had one hand on the door handle. There was no trace of surprise on his handsome face. He just slightly raised his beautiful chin and there was no trace of emotion in his indifferent eyes. "Reason?" Wei Wei Bai coldly said, "My period is here, so I'm going to eat breakfast." This reason was obviously fake. After all, who would run around with a towel wrapped around their period? After saying this lie, she still had a rebellious sneer on her face. Then she turned around and left. It was clear that she didn't want to leave. After walking a few steps, Wei Wei Bai heard the notification sound of the affection. Ding! The male lead's affection is at -10. Wei Wei Bai, only -10, that's too little. / you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.